It's live. That's right. I am here today. A little bit late. Doing some stuff. I guess I'll put out the link, huh? That'd be a good idea. I don't say. I've learned a new song. I'll show you that in a second. I know you're so into that, you random person in my. Oh, okay. Audio's working. So now I will post the link for you. And put it in my head. All right. That looks like that should be the link. All righty. So where's everybody? I posted a link moments ago. I might go smoke a cigarette. I haven't quit cigarettes yet. So hey, as part of my business, I want to have somebody to help me do some of my work, because I do the software engineering and I have to do all this, installing and cloud IT work, and I'd like to have somebody help me. So I'm writing a curriculum to train people. I have a volunteer. I built this machine yesterday or last 2 days. It's a huge case. It lights up. You can press a button to make it light up green or red or blue. And I got a SSD drive in there. It's only 60 gigabytes, but it's 10 times faster than a regular hard drive. It's awesome. So it runs, I installed Linux on it. Is it awake? Yeah, so it's running Linux. And I'm going to train them how to do cloud IT. And I made it so, hey, you can do video conferencing on Linux, no problem, using this. I think the camera in Linux, I don't know why it's so dark. It's kind of dark up here, but I think I might have changed the settings so like the brightness is different. So yeah, I went to New York. We went to, it's a cool city. For one thing, at least stuff is all together. Like in a city like San Francisco, the things you want to do are all over. And in New York, they're kind of all over, but the subway will take you anywhere, and it's so straightforward, this uptown, downtown, midtown thing. And so it was interesting. We went to, it was like $50 a ticket to go at the last minute for Broadway show that hasn't sold out. We went to see An American in Paris, I think is what it was called. And it was pretty good. I mean, it's not my kind of genre, dancing and singing, but it was still pretty good. I'd like to go see a purely dramatic or comedy, non-musical is what I'm saying. And a natural history museum, mind blowing. I've been to lots of rock and mineral displays, and that was amazing. They have the biggest meteorite chunk on display anywhere in the world. And it's huge. It's like 5 feet tall. It's right out there and you could touch it. It was in space. It's so awesome. Just a big chunk of iron. It doesn't look like iron when you just look at it. I mean, if you're a geologist, you would recognize right away, but it just looks like a big rock. But where they've, done, what is they call it? Taken a core, drill a little tube out, or they've shaved off some of the thing, and it's just pure metal. It's amazing. And a really cool patterns, they can tell that the iron, it's like this crystalline iron thing that can only happen in 0G or something. It's real pretty. But I mean, just even ordinary rocks like topaz. I never realized how nice topaz really is, because a little tiny topaz, yeah, whatever. I could have a piece of glass, fine. But they have big pieces of topaz and the luster in there. Or like I'm writing this story the last few years about Atlantis. Is like a science fiction-y kind of thing about Atlantis. And, for one reason I like writing is I end up doing research into things, history or whatever that I want, because I like to make the stuff semi-realistic. So the crystal wolfenite, I just found through, I'd never seen any or heard anything about it, but I researched this crystal, and they have specimens there. And it's not a specimen. It's not a kind of stone you would normally see, but I mean, it was just really things like that. I mean, again, if we were talking about spirituality, I'd say those are like A really good museum to me is like it gives me this feeling of connection to the universe. It's really the spiritual feeling. One of the best, I mean, I could give you a few museums that are of that high quality. The Desert Museum, which is near Tucson, might be an hour or two away, I forget. The Monterey Bay Aquarium is one of those places. The top one, the most, I mean, I couldn't believe how awesome it was. Hey, Andrew.
Hey,
I was just doing my opening spiel, waiting for people. But
I
I
was
was going
wondering if we were
to,
doing it.
well, at the moment I was talking about how great, I took a trip to New York, so I was talking about the Natural History Museum there and the gem and mineral section. Just, it was mind-blowing. It was awesome. So I went in through a list of, actually, I've had almost what I would consider spiritual experiences at really good museums, and so I was going through, and the one I was back down to, the number one most amazing thing, and I didn't even know it existed, is the mammoth. There's a mammoth dig in South Dakota where it was a big hot springs, like 90 degrees, and 100 feet or hundreds of feet across, 90 feet deep and stuff, and all kinds of animals fell in, including a couple dozen mammoths, and they just dig it out and leave it in place. In the museum, you walk through the skeletons that they've revealed still in the mud, and it's just full of animals, because just over the hundreds of years that it was going, all kinds of animals fell in. It's like the La Brea tar pits kind of a thing, and but no tar though. But they fell in, they couldn't get out. All male mammoths, no female mammoths. So, but anyway, you've probably never heard of it. I never had it. It's in South Dakota. It's kind of a good story too, in the sense that it was discovered by a guy who was making some apartment buildings, and they found some bones, and he immediately called a halt to construction and brought in scientists. And as soon as it turned out, it was like, oh, it's one of the most amazing archaeological finds of forever. He just gave the land to the state, and it's like, okay, good, science. I'll go build my apartments over there. That'll be fine, which I thought was cool. So what have
Yeah,
you been up to?
I haven't been to anything like that. I guess there must be all kinds of fossils and bones in there, eh?
Yeah, they have everything. As a matter of fact, I was surprised to find out there's llamas in there. There's these kind of bears that are just missing links in evolution. It's all of these La Brea tar pits, kind of saber-toothed tiger, but there were no saber-toothed tigers there. But that era, and yeah, there were llamas up there, and and this is South Dakota, so it's kind of amazing. And just and actually, the scientists are so good. They're finding all the little mice, and just hundreds and thousands of animals have been exhumed, and they've done a core, and all the way to the bottom of the core, I think it was 70, 80 further feet than they haven't dug in the core sample, with just a little tiny, inch-sized core. There's fossils all the way down, so they're not sure. But it was like a massive hot spring, and this town still has a hot spring in it, a pretty massive one that puts out like 9,000 gallons an hour or something. And so this what an awesome hot springs that would have been, man. It's like hundreds of feet across pond at 90 degrees year round. But as a result, there was probably vegetation and stuff, and so animals would go down there and have no way to get out. Humans, they've never found any humans remains, but humans were around when this thing was going, but they would be able to climb out. On the other hand, if you went in the hot spring, you'd be there with a bunch of skeletons. I don't know how nice it would actually be, but
I guess the tar pit has been a convenient time capsule for us.
yeah, and this is another one just like it. And so all these things are encased in mud, but and so that, it was really cool. But also, I'm a sucker for a good museum, or a site. I also love ruins. Who doesn't love ruins? I guess they're pretty popular. But so
Is the topic today about time, or was that just because you were late?
late.
And you were
Yeah, it
ironically
was just
saying,
kind
what
of off
is
the top.
time?
Yeah, what's the topic? We could talk about.
Okay.
No,
I,
it's pretty much open. I didn't prepare anything. You know, I keep talking to Quintica about going over the feminism issues, and I'm interested in doing that. But I didn't really prepare anything. I figured we'd see who showed up.
I was always curious when we talk about Nietzsche, but it's your show, and so I will certainly wait
Well,
around until.
no, you and I are here. Let's talk about Nietzsche. What do you want to talk about Nietzsche?
I really liked back in the day, Mr. Cropper. I really liked Mr. Cropper and his videos, and I know you did. This is actually how I discovered your channel. This is probably 4 years ago now.
Right, right.
You did I think it was 10 videos long, back and forth of Cropper's reading of Thus Spake Zarathustra, and he tried to bring in a little more understanding to the reading, which I thought was great. But I really liked that, and Beyond Good and Evil has all kinds of nice aphorisms, little tiny little like 1 page or half-page pieces on stuff. But I did like a lot of stuff in Nietzsche, his the metaphor of the overman, and then the metamorphoses. And I actually used it in a course I was teaching at a college about the philosophy of education. I was kind of using Nietzsche's. I guess I was inferring that Nietzsche's philosophy of education might be the three metamorphoses, um, the camel, the lion, and the child, and fighting the dragon and stuff. So I was just, and I think you might remember. I think it might have been a year ago now. I made a couple videos on Thus Spake Zarathustra. Didn't release them to the public, but I did send them to you just to see what you'd have to say, because
Did I get
I think
back
you
to you?
must
Because I
know
do
more.
remember that.
Yeah.
Did I get back to you? I'm
Yeah,
not sure. Yeah, and
yeah, you
because I
left
remember
a
you
few
telling me this
comments.
before, and I think I probably told you I would like to do, like, one of my many failed projects, as far as it's not even a failure, because I know when you start them, I don't necessarily have the strength to keep a series going. Doesn't mean I shouldn't try.
Yeah.
Was that Beyond Good and Evil thing, and I would like to read through that. I mean, I still wish I had the energy to do that. It's fun. I don't know why. It's just hard. It's a lot of times when I'm making a video, it's just like, hey, I've got 10 minutes, and it's not like, oh, wait, am I going to read this and prepare? But I wish I would, and I'd like to take things to the next level and do that kind of preparation. But anyway, so back to what you were saying. So, yeah, well, I mean, my general thing with Nietzsche is, you know, when I was in my 20s, I probably was prone to worship or whatever, right? But then reading Nietzsche enough, you get to the point where he's like, you know, you read him a couple times, it's confusing, but after a while it starts to become clear that, you know, he's pretty clear about, well, one reason I wrote so confusing is because you can't be a Nietzsche head. I'm not even saying I'm not contradictory or anything. You can't really just follow along. And all of this stuff about, you know, anything you think you agree with was just a stare, and I kept walking, and then I fell dead at one of the stairs, and you'd be a moron to stop there and camp. So you've got to keep going, and things about how all teachers, you know, good students overcome their teacher, and good teachers, that's what they want to have happen, and so on and so forth. And I sort of grew out of thinking he had all the answers, and probably the breaking point was there were years when I was trying to defend him, or offer an apologia for his views on women, right? And I realized, well, that's kind of pointless. The whole, you know, why should I have to do that? So after all of that, I think what you have with Nietzsche is what he really wanted is that it's like going into a philosophy shop with both antique and modern little philosophy tools. I mean, I could just go on and on of concepts. You mentioned a couple, but there's also just little abstract concepts about how you should think about, you know, metaphysics and what does it mean, you know, or his, one of my favorite things of his, you're familiar with him going through the cogito, you know, criticizing, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, things like that to me, just not so much you know, that he's doubting this famous thing, but the fact of how he reasons about it, how he unwraps what the words are really meaning and what the assumptions are in that sentence. Because, you know, up to that point, and I think still people are like, well, of course, yeah, I think, therefore I exist. And it was, you know, it was revelatory to me to say, no, actually, as a philosopher, we can look at what assumptions are making you just automatically say that you think, therefore you exist is true. Of course, his point being that we don't know we're doing the thinking. We could be the result of thinking. We're assuming that we're the actor as opposed to the result of the action, and this is something we don't actually know. But
Yeah. One of the most important things that I got out of Nietzsche is I did like his passion for life and for trying to do well, and his kind of ridicule of the complacent, ridicule of the weak, and just I just think that's a better. I like that pursuit of knowledge and existence and survival, rather than the often today the pragmatic, the skeptical. I know, although that's kind of the basis of your name is Puro, but
right.
I think I like that. It's like a passion for humanity and for life, versus the alternatives that I see a lot of today. I did like that. That was important to me to get that from Nietzsche.
Yeah, you know, and that's a funny thing because this is one of the big divisions. Some people just don't get that. Okay, and sometimes it's like my dad went to philosophy, but he went to a Catholic university and he was just taught this idea of Nietzsche was, you know, like some Nazi or something. Okay, so those people don't understand, but even among people don't understand Nietzsche the way you just said is that. But I took in college Nietzsche, and professors of, and a lot of people that obviously have read Nietzsche and are careful readers of philosophy. You know, they're not just lying. Maybe they have their preconceived notions, but you know, they see him as a pessimist, down on life. Life sucks. That's why you should just beat people up. And you know, and that's never what he said. I mean, it's so obvious that his is a philosophy of art. It's like you should just be an artist, live with presto, and yeah, figure out what you want, and it's beyond good and evil, but that doesn't mean it's evil. It's
Yeah.
not pro-evil.
They were probably psychologizing Nietzsche. Like, I think what happens a lot in academic settings is before you even read a person's work, you're expected to read their biography and get a sense of the time they're in and the person they are.
Really?
Which I think it really introduces a lot of bias, because then you want to psychologize this person, and then when you of course see Nietzsche's views on women, you go, oh well, of course, because he had a lot of problems with women and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, but again, like, I think the psychologizing is probably the source there.
I think you're right. Hey, were you trying to get in there? Welcome, Manuel
Hi.
Kant. Nietzsche had a few things to say on good old Kant too. But anyway, how you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Just to jump in on what you said about beyond good and evil, that people see it as evil. It's a bit like how nihilists get a bad reputation for being negative, when in fact nihilism annihilates itself. It's so nihilistic that it can be whatever you want it to be.
Right.
It's pretty much the same thing.
I think it is. I mean, in the case of nihilism, it's kind of a funny thing because I think that it's internally inconsistent, and it's sort of a transitionary thing. It's like trying to have a perfect vacuum, but it's where, and this is something I learned from Nietzsche too, that nihilism is part of a progression of when you're overturning one age, one philosophy, and you're going into another one. You necessarily travel through this thing called nihilism, but it's like you said, it's always different. It's really based on the culture. You know, it's based on those people that are saying nihilism, because it is ultimately it is just a liberation. It's like, I don't know which of these rules are important or not, so fuck them all. But people don't actually give up all of their they might not think of them as rules, but they still have standards. They treat people a certain way, and nihilism is pretty much just whatever you want. And I don't think it can last.
Yeah.
It always grows into something else.
I think nihilism is a kind of emptiness. It's so empty that it gives room for anything to fill that void.
Yeah.
It's at right angles to all notions of good and bad in a way that you can't really call it either.
Right.
I think that's what must piss off Gary a lot too in some of the debates. And that's another question I wanted to ask Puro is, I guess I came on all this late, and I'm wondering, maybe you don't want to talk about him, but what is like the YouTube community and going on with Gary in Mendham, I guess is his YouTube name.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he has debates. He has Google Hangouts, and you have Google Hangouts.
Mm-hmm.
And then that couple weeks ago, that more entertaining one. I'm just curious, what's that relationship like?
Yeah, I could give you a little rundown on how that all went. It's kind of interesting, and
Yeah.
I mean, in a socially commentary kind of way, but to me, but since you asked, but also, I wanted to go back to about the Nietzsche thing. It's interesting that you say. I don't remember being ever told to read any of the biography stuff before, and I've always done it quite the other way. I think that's a terrible idea, to teach people's biography as their philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand wanting to know the biography after, and it can inform something. And I think one of the things about his view on women is, yeah, it's a pretty good example of, see his biography, the stern Lutheran women, and okay, so he had this attitude. But also in his philosophy, he says these are personal truths. I mean, he writes Zarathustra and says, I'm calling out the truth of the universe here, la la la, I'm a wonderful poet. And then when it comes to the women things, he doesn't apologize for him, but he does point out, hey, these are my personal views, and I see it as one of the things. Of course, this does come from the era when I was apologizing for him for it. Not that he wasn't necessarily a little misogynistic in some sense. There's evidence he was not that way with women in general. But he had these criticisms. And it's almost like one of the landmines. Like, he made his philosophy so personal that it would be silly to try to become a Nietzschean, and I agree with him, and Napoleon was great, and, you know, democracy is not so hot. You know, it would be silly to do that. So, but, and I think if that's really what's going on, that's maybe, I don't know, it explains anything, but it's a terrible way to learn philosophy.
It's just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I do think that it can be problematic to learn someone's life story first, which will then pervert or distort your interpretation of the philosophy in a way that you're just criticizing the individual, and your views of them are preventing you from really addressing the substance of their philosophy. You just
Really, it's part of the times where, when you want to say that, oh, this is another white male we have to study. Now it's becoming white heterosexual male. Or Eurocentric. We don't have to study them. If we have to because of the curriculum, then we're going to bias them first, so you don't have to listen to anything they really have to say. Like, that's the times I think we're in, and it happens, I think, more frequently, depending on the instructor.
Yeah, but you've got to be careful so that you don't end up, you know, just attacking them individually, and or looking past what they're saying philosophically just because of their biography, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, no, and I think, okay, so there's two things in that. One is there really maybe some sort of liberalism gone awry here in how we characterize it? Of course, there must be. There always has been. In Nietzsche's case, there's an example where it was just, you know, wrapped up with the Nazis. In the West, in America, they taught, you know, that he was, you know, not really valuable for so long. So there's this history, and that's interesting because I can imagine that could be happening. I think there's some decay in academia that I'm willing, you know, as a liberal, to maybe see that, you know, part of that in humanities might be that, hey, we're going to study the biographies as a way of ignoring the philosophical ideas. But on the other side, there's this. When I was younger working on philosophy, I had a feeling that, well, it's so general, it's how you use your brain, what proves a good philosophy, and this idea that, what does everybody do? They want to look at a successful person. If they think Donald Trump is successful, then it's him. If they think he's a bozo and it's Elon Musk, then it's him. Or maybe it's somebody that has no money. It's some guy that went in the Mosquito Coast or builds cars. They go to this person they see as successful. It's like, what's your philosophy? As if a good philosophy, a valid philosophy, makes you have a successful life. And that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. It's logical. It has logic within it and some evidence that you can agree or disagree that things seem this way. Summer does seem hotter than winter or whatever. But it has internal structure. So it has nothing to do with whether your life was successful. And especially in the case of philosophers, which are all kinds of weird people and rarely married, rarely living any kind of ordinary life that people would want to have from learning a philosophy. And that's just not the point,
And that's why that's why I disagree with the view that truth is simply that which works, because all manner of things can work. Lies can work. Success can be determined by a whole number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be truth.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's, of all epistemologies, I think that's the weakest.
Yeah.
It's just
pragmatist.
It's more than.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of a, what is it called? I might get the term. Is it called the coherence theory of truth? Kind of a real popular and not necessarily taken, just the idea that the truth is what coheres with the facts in reality. The problem being that, okay, how do we get those facts? How do you ever double check that it, right?
No, that's not quite it. Corresponding is that
Correspondence, that's it. Correspondence, I'm sorry, that's what I was talking about. Correspondence, yes, so correspondence theory. I kind of basically believe that kind of system. It's just that as a skeptic, I don't expect for us to be able to go out into the real world. So my correspondence just goes from your senses, the information you have from your senses, the things that you say, do they correspond? If the things you say are true about your experiences, you don't get to pretend you had fun when you had a bad time and just say, no, but I had fun and that's true. No, you had a bad time. But if you're honest and they cohere with your experiences, then that's truth. I think that's sufficient.
Yeah, well, there will be limits as to what we can know and determine to be true, but when you're talking about the meaning of truth, I think correspondence is satisfactory, even if we can't know if it, truly corresponds beyond what the limits of our perception.
Yeah. As a skeptic, I don't find that acceptable. If we can never actually know that it corresponds, and we have a definition of truth that's based on that it does correspond, but there's no way to establish it, when in fact we are able to establish it, that's just must be missing the phenomena we're actually using to get knowledge, is my thought, has been my theory on that. There has to be something else, right? It can't be correspondence to something that we don't have access to, because how come we're so good at finding it then?
Well, truth would just be correspondence between proposition and a fact, but that would be...
But what's a fact?
Facts are what make propositions true or false. Like, for example, if I say something like, I'm having a conversation right now, that proposition is made true by corresponding to the fact that, there's the meaning of your words is already implicit in that, like it's already assumed that you know what those words mean in a way that is true.
But well, in the skeptical criticism, though, is that it's okay. So what is a fact? It's the situation in reality, but we never have that situation in reality to deal with. We always have some perception.
Yeah.
Information of it. And so to me, I'm saying that's sufficient because I have this solipsistic starting point. I'm not a solipsist, but we start off with, I got my information. My truth statements are relative to that information. Yeah. And so that's the correspondence, and it's all inside, that maybe we're in a matrix, and it leaves this question of what is the external world. But ontologically, it leaves it undefined. But in terms of what does it seem to be, it's not undefined. We get to study it. Yeah,
but I mean, I'm just when I talk about correspondence and truth, I just mean that anything you're referring to without reference to what's outside you or anything at all. Just within those confined limits, there's the correspondence, which is what truth means. There's no way you could be, quote, wrong about that unless it was a lack of correspondence. So you have to have truth before you can have falsehood, I guess, or vice versa.
Well, what do you think? I mean, this is back in my late 20s. One of the turns I took was this idea that really you do need to define truth and falsity in terms of honesty and dishonesty, I think. I don't think there's any way of, traditionally we don't want to do that. Dishonesty, that seems like a harder thing to define than truth, but I think really that's what we would have to do. To me, I'm not looking for absolute truths, but the problem is with relativism, sometimes people think that that means the relativist is giving all the individuals like the right to say how things are. But no, because somebody
make sense.
Yeah, no, because somebody, if it seems like a bad situation, but they want it to be a good situation, and they psychologically say, no, it is a good situation, and here's why, because the badness is good for me, and this and they're rationalizing. Well, that's not honesty. That's not truth. So there is still a correspondence. You don't get to decide what's true just because maybe something is different between two different people. Different things might be possible to be true. It doesn't mean you get to just choose and pick. And I think the issue, though, is, see, to me, it doesn't matter that we don't know that facts are about ideas. The fact would be, I sensed red. The fact would actually be, I think I sensed red. It's later now. Maybe I'm misremembering what the color of the shirt was. And so the fact would always be a statement about the information you think you have and how it appears to be. And so it doesn't touch the world. I'm sorry, I was struggling for this, but I'll finish up. So it doesn't touch the world in some sense, right? It doesn't reach out as much. But if you just say, well, I don't know what the world is made of, but I know I'm getting information about it, then suddenly I can have concrete statements about information, and whether it's in a matrix, a dream of Vishnu, a bunch of gears and BBs, whatever the ontology of the physical world is, it's just information. And I think in physics we're finding out that the physical world is just information. So suddenly there's kind of a unification of you don't have to leave your brain to touch the real world, because your brain is part of the real world, and whatever you're experiencing is the real world. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's actually my view, that how things seem is inseparable from how they are. However distant. Kant's division between phenomena and noumena.
Right, I like that.
We are the thing in itself, in a way.
Yeah.
And we're always in search of ourselves. The self can never find itself because it's the thing that's doing the referencing. And I think that it's basically what I was talking about with correspondence was that as soon as you refer to something, in order to be wrong or right about something, you first have to identify what it is you're talking about, and then distinguish it. And then once you've done that, you've automatically you've got truth, without reference to what's outside it, I think.
I want to respond to that, but I think somebody's here real quick, so I'm going to try to remember that. But that's interesting. I have questions on that. That's there's a lot of different. I think somebody's down there, and my dog's freaking out. So I'll be right back. Sorry to not answer right away, actually, because yeah, okay. Hopefully I'll remember when I come back. Bye. What is going on, Lily?
One thing I'll ask you is that how can there possibly be any conception of truth unless it's absolute? Because otherwise we're in a pragmatic realm of, well, it seems to be true for now, but it might not be true tomorrow, and it seems to work for us for now.
Well, there's a difference between what we think is true and what truth actually means. So I guess I was talking about the meaning of. There's a very subtle distinction between what is reasonable and what we think is reasonable, and that you can't really try to you can't really doubt reason by reasoning, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think the best way to illustrate truth is through demonstrations, through examples, through elucidations. That, like I said before, if I say I'm having a conversation, that's true because the meaning of those words corresponds to a fact. And in order for something to be wrong, it has to be not corresponding, it has to map to something else. So even though we may not be able to know what's true, there's a special case in that we can know the meaning of truth insofar as knows to have any meaning at all.
Don't you see it as a contradiction to say that we can't know what the truth is, but isn't that statement itself a truth statement?
Well, contradictions are necessarily false. So the reason that contradictions are false is because they contradict how things are. Like if something is the case and you say it's not the case, that's defined as false because it's contradicting. That's what it means for something to be contradictory.
Hello. Sorry about that. There was somebody looking for my stepson. But they're gone. You guys still here?
Yep.
So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in that. One of them was when you just started off, you were like, you said something about how you don't think we can really separate how things seem from what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we're already referring to it.
Yeah, and so here's the weird thing. So there's a couple things that lately, to me, feels like it's come together, and I have a little bit of a, it's very similar to what I've been saying over the years, but I just feel like a more of a better focus on that there's an actual concept there where, okay, so the problem with things connected to how they seem, of course, is that we know as modern people, and every intellectual person has some of the hobby I have of, looking into things aren't what they seem. There's always something else. The sun comes up in the morning. It turns out, no, we're spinning. And then we're going around the sun. Well, really, even that's an illusion. The sun and everything's flying through space. We're all spiraling in this cluster of, and the sun goes around the center of mass of the solar system. And there's always something wrong with how things seem. So does that mean we're infinitely disconnected? And then there's this sort of a hippie statement, but I think it's literally true that unifies this, which is that I've liked for years and I just recently made seem more significant. It is sort of hippie sounding, but that you're the universe at your location, right?
Yeah.
Like, is the universe intelligent? Well, at your location it is, and when you move that location, then the intelligence isn't over there anymore, it's over where you just moved. And you are that phenomena. So this is what I'm trying to get at with the illusions exist thing, you see, is like, yeah, it's always an illusion. Everything that appears to be a certain way is an illusion, but the information is what explains, like when we say that the Earth goes around the sun, it's not that that's totally true. We're all flying through space in weird spirally kind of paths. What we're saying is that compared to it looking like the sun goes up, in other words, in answer to the illusion, when we figure out it's an illusion, the information is the part that says, hey, it seems this way, but it's this other way. And the information is always relative to the current illusion, and they go together hand in hand. They're the two sides of a coin, and we can move it in the greater information direction. And since we are an actual phenomenon in the universe, that, to me, starts to answer why, yeah, you can't there's truth in how things seem. There's truth in the illusion. The truth
Yeah,
is
I mean,
there's a phenomena.
Illusions exist, but what they seem to represent abstractly is not true.
Yeah, it's always something else. But that's the other thing about the word illusion. We have this word of illusion. Sometimes we mean it like a delusion, but really you can have a false reality of thinking the sun goes around the earth. That's a false reality. Or you can look at the sun and it looks like it's going around the earth, and you live your life like it's going around the earth and rises and sets, and morning is a thing, and you can absolutely live that way. And it's just once you know it's an illusion, then oh, there's more to the reality. So the illusion is the positive. It's when the delusion has gone away. I don't think God is in the sky anymore. I know that's an illusion.
Yeah.
I can still look up and see that face in the clouds, and it doesn't.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't undo the phenomenon. It just, like for example, it's like with light. When light got reduced to electromagnetism, it didn't make the phenomena disappear. It just explained it in terms of this larger. Same with sunsets. It doesn't actually. Like obviously sunsets still happen. It's just that we are understanding them in terms of this larger framework. That the illusion always existed, but what it seemed to represent did not.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of putting all this, like I've heard it called layers of truth, but you don't have to call them illusions. Like even Ayn Rand had the idea of things are true in a context. So in a context, the Earth isn't moving around the sun in a context. But if you broaden it, you say, well, everything's moving around the Milky Way or whatever. So you can talk of truth in these contexts, in these boxes, or in these layers.
But you have to be careful because it can get if you're not
But how
careful.
is that not like an illusion? Sorry, go ahead.
It can lead to contradictions if you're not careful, like because equivocate and conflate senses of different.
They should
But
never.
I would say,
If they're true in a context, there'll never be a contradiction. Is the theory.
So, I mean, as a relativist, real relativism is about the fact that all statements of fact need to be relative to some sort of a context. There's other words for it, but that's basically what it's relative to. So a thing you could call context is situation. But the thing is, to me, when you choose a context, you're choosing an illusion. Like for intellectual purposes, you're saying, let's consider, like sometimes in science you might have 30 terms in this equation, and you're like, yeah, but the coefficients of all of these are so close to zero, we can never solve this equation mathematically with those terms, but they're so close to zero, we go through an argument, we know, let's just assume those don't matter, they're all zero, we have a simpler equation we can then work with. And what you're doing is you're setting up the context. But what you're also doing is you're accepting something you know is not true. That's an illusion. If I look in the sky and see a face and I think it's God coming down, I don't know that as an illusion. It's a hallucination. It's a false reality. Someone outside my brain could say, I am unaware of that. Once I know it's an illusion, then I still see the face in the cloud, and my interpretation is different.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's what I was saying before.
Well, but let's get back to the thing. I mean, the thing with Ayn Rand and her getting to use context is that she's an objectivist. The proper objectivism, in my mind, is that there is a universal context where actual truths are true. And you can context your way out of having to decide whether vanilla is better than chocolate, but there's supposed to be a single context, a parent context, which I don't believe in. I believe the world's more surreal. You call me a surrealist or something. That just doesn't seem to be one context.
That's what I believe, because if you have things being relative to individuals, it still has to take place in a non-relative arena. So in that sense, I'd be an objectivist, because subjects have to coexist in order to be subjects at all. Yeah. So it's almost like you've always got an objectivism, even if you're a solipsist. Because if you're a solipsist, how things seem is how they are.
There seems to be something, like if you were a solipsist, it would feel like you're the one conscious agent in an existing universe.
So, yeah.
And that could be the case. You could be the last living thing, and that would be the case. And so is that really solipsism? No, because you do have this externality. But let me just say real quick, so this way I've been going, where it doesn't matter if we're in Vishnu's dreams or what kind, the ontology of the world, we're just getting information. And then so I'm living in a world of information. Then the information itself is the tangible thing, you see, and we can't, like if I'm in a dream and I have the information of dropping a stone on my foot, and in my dream it breaks my toes and I'm excruciating pain and I can't walk and I have to go to the doctor in my dream. I mean, there is no difference for me. That hurt my foot just like if it's, you know, however it was generated. So so in the information world, when the external world is actually just, to me, about not being a solipsist. I see phenomena out there that are fit what I would call agency, and I fit that, and they could be figments of my imagination in some sense. It wouldn't really matter. The definition of the external world in that case is all the information we're you know. It's the pipeline. I can send information to that agent. I can get information from that agent. There has to be a transfer space, right, where the information is going through from me to them. And that is what we like to call the external world. And again, maybe it's not external. Maybe we're in a matrix, and those are just memory bus pathways where information is going. But guess what? That still would be a physical world, right? The matrix is a real computer there. Or let's say it's Vishnu's dream, and this information is going through Vishnu's, you know, ethereal, made of energy, neural brain, or however that works. Well, that exists then. Yeah. So like you're saying, even a solipsist, there's got to be something material, even if it's dream stuff.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's why I said how things seem, no matter how distant, can't be separated from how they are, because it doesn't matter if, we're already referring, talking about something, so whatever.
So that's way different than Kant then. Yeah, that's way more sophisticated than Kant.
It's like Kant squared, because Schopenhauer saw that the true path to the thing in itself was that we already are the thing in itself. We don't need to look for it. We can't be separated from the ground of reality.
Oh, wait a second. Okay, so let's see. I'm getting rusty and old. Sometimes I forget how much I must have forgotten by not thinking. So Schopenhauer, so was he the monad guy? Who was the monad guy?
Leibniz.
And Schopenhauer said everything was will, right? Isn't that one of the theories out of Schopenhauer?
Except that, that's one of the things that he said, but that's not necessarily.
And who did you just say? I'm sorry. Who did you just mention that you said that figured out we are the thing in itself?
Schopenhauer.
But he did not do this with any kind of monadistic reasoning.
He took a kind of Eastern Vedantic view that we all are at root one self, and we are the ground of reality, and we think we're separate from it, just inside it, when in fact we are an aspect of it. We can't be separate from deep down what there is. Even if, like I said, how things seem can't be separated from how they are, however distant.
Yeah, I think this is something, isn't this something we all think right now, but we don't know we think it. We think we have these views hundreds of years ago, but if we're materialists and there's no spirit coming into our so-called body, then this whole thing, like I was saying, this hippie sounding, you are the universe at your location, that you are. So you can't separate yourself from being a physical brain and all the rest of it. So but go ahead.
It was Descartes who actually muddied the waters. See, the funny thing is, a lot of atheists, they ditch the view of the soul, but they still want to pretend that they're just a poor little me inside a body separate from everything else. You know what I mean? They don't go the whole way. They don't. It's like people who first hear, like I said before about nihilism, they view nihilism as negative, but they don't go the whole way in negating the negative completely. They'll still view it as a doom and gloom kind of thing.
Yeah, well, the Pyrrhonism, that was a big deal, right? So Sextus, said there's three kinds of philosophy. There's the dogmatic and the skeptic, and then the so-called academic skeptic, which is really the nihilist. And
Before we
that
get
was
off,
his problem with nihilism is that it's a kind of dogmatism. It
Only
says there's one
problem,
truth.
only,
Academic.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Only problem I have with skepticism is that I think that Bertrand Russell put it rightly when he said that skepticism, while logically impeccable, always seems a little bit dishonest because it can make the unwise man seem as wise as the learned man just by backseat driving and asking questions all the time, and it sort of makes you think that the person isn't really being serious with you. So that's kind of why I lose patience with radical skeptics, because sometimes you don't actually feel like they're trying to know.
Yeah.
It's like they're just doing it to be annoying.
and they can't live by it. You can't live as a skeptic, or you wouldn't get up in the morning,
Well,
and
you can't.
certainly
No, but
wouldn't
this is like
drive
with
down the
Nietzsche.
road.
No, but wait. Some of this is like with Nietzsche, just of how it's been characterized. Because most skeptics, even the academic ones, they didn't not believe anything. Pyrrho, very specifically, or at least according to Sextus Empiricus, you're supposed to assent to the way things seem to be. You just know that there's illusion in that. Skepticism, the term skepticism is about reflecting. It doesn't mean doubt. It comes from the word to think and ponder and reflect. It's like saying there's always more to think about in a given subject. It doesn't mean you have time to think about it. It doesn't mean that you won't save your life by just going with the fact that it looks like a real axe flying towards your head.
That reminds me.
Nobody's ever said that, and it's not like they're dishonest. Pyrrho specifically was that you are supposed to do that, and it's an epistemology of science where all knowledge is theoretical. It's just not absolute. It's not final. It's not dogmatic. It's in progress. And so, of course, you can live that way. We live that way now. That's how science progresses.
Yeah,
I said earlier, Pyrrho, about like we think the Earth is rolling around the sun, but that's not quite true because really we're all moving around. Do you think, though, that would continue? Like, it seemed like you were setting up a theory that there's always more to something, but that's a metaphysical claim that that's how reality works. But how could that continue on forever, that there's always something more to it? Are you sure that's how reality works? Because will there not be a final?
I'm not sure.
Now we've got it all.
That's my impression, and I think the evidence that it could be possible, it seems so inconceivable with our understanding of logical reductionism and stuff, or how does infinity, could that even work, and what is how much of that is an abstraction and everything like that. But I think in mathematics we see plenty of it. In fractals, in cellular automata, all the work of Wolfram and the new kind of science, we see that very simple, very procedural, predictable, determinable processes lead to patterns that are purely stochastic. And so there's infinite detail. Like just the fact that you have a number like pi that's so important, and yet in our number system, and any number system we could make of digits, it's going to have to be an infinite number of digits. Does that mean pi doesn't really exist? Because how we would ever get... No, it does exist.
Just because pi, the number pi, runs off, it's really saying the same thing, but it's because of our mathematics, our numbers have to keep trailing out. But you can still have a circle.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
but I'm just saying, look, even in these simple mathematical things, there's in the ratio of the radius or the circumference of the square and the circle, that requires an infinite number of terms for us to describe. So yeah, I think there can be an infinite number of details. I think if we want to find out all the digits of pi, we could keep going forever, and we will keep finding out more digits of pi.
No infinity in reality. There can't be.
Well, I would disagree with that.
But I wouldn't even have to disagree necessarily. I may or may not. But besides that, what we're saying is not that there are infinite digits in pi. What we're saying is it would take an infinite number of terms to describe pi in terms of digits. Right? So it would take that, and I'm just saying that means the well is infinitely deep. Since we will never do infinite, that's why I say forever. we could get more information.
But that doesn't say anything about reality. That only says something about our mathematical notation.
The map is not the
Still have
territory.
circles.
You
No, I'm
could,
saying it's an example of how, well, in our life experiences, there's always more information. We could always, but we're limited creatures, so maybe that's just because, yeah, there's always more information.
There's not always more.
There isn't
There's
always
plenty
more
of-
information. As a human being, you don't always find more information could be available that you haven't pursued.
Well, there's got to be a terminal to that, though.
You're
It can't
just
go on
making a
forever.
logical assumption that there has to be a terminal. I'm saying, in terms of the logical assumption that there's a terminus, let's look to math, pure logic, and we see examples with no terminus. Back to reality, we didn't have a terminus to begin with. We're always less informed than we could be. No?
Mm-hmm. I
just
agree
think
with that. There's
reality is finite.
there's necessarily unknown unknowns. Like, this goes back to my argument. I don't want to sidetrack this, but I was basically arguing against omniscience, saying that even if you did know everything, you couldn't know that. Back to self-reference. A lot of paradoxes arise out of self-reference.
Yeah.
And like you said with pi, you could also do it like a triangle, a right-angle triangle, 1 meter on one side and 1 meter on the other, and the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. That's irrational as well, but it doesn't stop you from drawing the triangle.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. That's the difference between reality and mathematics. Mathematics is a human tool. Reality is not a human tool. That's my position. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, and I think your position is totally fair. I was just saying, you know, these key points that led me out of it. Because, for example, I actually had a very big philosophical growth moment on YouTube because of a user, this is probably 6 years ago now, Casino McCool. I used to have trouble feeling that pi was a real number.
Oh.
Sure, it was a thing, but it wasn't a real number because, look, you have all these digits, and Casino McCool proved to me that you're just writing down the number 2 as well. If you measure 2, you're never going to get it just right either. The fact that pi, it's actually the other way around. Pi is a more legitimate number than 2. 2 is kind of an arbitrary human point on the number line to go, this is useful to us, count 2 items. Pi and e, you know, these square root of 2 as well, show up all over the place.
Yeah.
They actually are in the math. They also show up in the physics. So it's like, okay, pi is actually more of a number, and I understood the number line differently at that point. And
yeah, depending on what base you're in as well. Like, because if we had something like base pi, right, +1 would just mean another pi.
Yeah, I've done that, but see, the issue there is then the whole numbers have infinite digits and stuff, right? So you can't escape. You can't escape this infinity thing, right?
But I don't.
Going back to what we were talking about, well, how real is infinity or not? How imaginary or real is it?
I don't have any real philosophical puzzles about infinity. I think that the reason that it seems so difficult to grasp because we try to chase it and find an end, and because we can't find an end, we think that this is this terrible puzzle, when in fact, just realizing that something doesn't have a limit, it doesn't seem problematic to me.
Well, my first approach on it, I think is useful, was just, to me, infinity, I agree with the infinity doesn't really exist, and it's always about one more. Like, what would a bag full of an infinite number of apples look like? Would it be infinitely large? Well, it's easier to imagine a bag of infinite apples as a bag you can always pull another apple out of. You know, like a magic bag, it's always got at least one apple in it. And that's more what infinity is. It's like, it's induction. It's like, what if we did this again? You know, it's like a geometric series. It's like, okay, what if you know, it's a recursive, let's just do it again. How long are we going to do it? Well, until we get to the finishing place, the remainder is 0 or whatever. And hey, there's some situations where, with that rule, the remainder is never 0, and it goes on forever. And it's a process. It's not a number. You know, when I was really younger, I was like, why can't I divide by infinity? And, you know, I kind of got the understanding of why infinity is not a number. And, but it is real. It came back around to me that it is a real thing, though. This always having to do something else.
Infinity is real. But as for the bag with infinite apples in it, spatially speaking, it wouldn't be a bag because it wouldn't have limits.
Right.
Like geometrically, it wouldn't have a boundary
No, but that's
beyond
what I'm
bound.
saying. What if it's a bag that always seems like it's got like 5 apples in it? When you pull one out, you can do it more than 5 times. That would be the only way to make an infinite bag. So my point was just as a thought
Right.
experiment, infinity is more about process. I'm not going to ever have an infinite apple at one time in one bag.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even be a bag. But I could have a bag
Yeah.
of infinite apples if I'm allowed to keep taking apples out.
Sure, there's
I
nothing.
think
There's nothing
I-
contradictory about. There's nothing contradictory or confusing about the idea of always pulling out another apple out of the bag. Like, a lot of people just have a hard time with infinity. They think that, oh, well, if it's infinite, then I could never get to. Like, if time is infinite in the past, I could never get here. And they get wrapped up in all kinds of
On the other hand,
puzzles.
that example also, Andrew, I think concedes to you that well, that sounds like magic. That doesn't sound like something real. So that would sound like
Yeah,
infinity.
it does
is
sound like
real.
magic.
Yeah, it would be magic in that case, which makes infinity kind of okay. It's just a little tool we're doing.
It is a tool.
We can think about magic and use it
Yeah.
as an idea, write a poem. We could, and this infinity then is in that thing. Yeah, we can use it. We're not saying it doesn't exist as a human tool, but it's something arbitrary. But I don't think it is. I think space is both limited to 14, giga-year radius sphere, and that there's an infinite amount of space between us and that finite distance.
What I was thinking
Oh, yeah.
about is the difference between an open and a closed system. It seems to me like you could have an infinite process in a closed system
Hmm.
as opposed to an open system. But
Well,
then
this goes-
you find a closed system.
Yeah, this goes back to.
Is open or closed? Probably closed by definition, huh? But I don't think that's known. The universe could be open.
Well, Cantor had different types of infinities. You could have infinities within infinities. You can also have fractional infinities, even though like 1 and 2 are finite. You can have infinite fractions in between those two. Like
Yeah.
space can be infinitely divisible. Leibniz thought that there were actual infinitesimals, Newton didn't. So it also goes back to whether or not
It looks like
The
there
The
are.
problem with discussing infinity in terms of reality is it messes up metaphysics. You can't have a finite universe if there's infinite things going on.
I don't agree with that. Like spatially, you can have a finite universe with, like, infinite
I think
things
there's a
happen.
finite amount of energy maybe in the universe. I might go for that, or at least just to put that out there. I mean, I think there might be some way of saying there's finitude or whatever to the finitude, to the
Physical world.
in some
Yeah.
sense. Well, it's like this thing of I believe that the edge of the universe is this 14 billion light years away, and that's a distance. It seems pretty freaking finite. But I also believe that at the edge of that, space is all compressed, similar to the infinite digits in pi. And there is no other way to explain it except for that you would always, if you travel 13 billion light years, you're still 14 billion light years from the edge of your universe. So
What was the compressed? Hero, what was the compressed thing? What was the compressed idea? Are you saying that
at the edge of the universe, space is all compressed, like at a Schwarzschild radius, right?
Finite
you
but
mean-
unbounded.
Yeah,
you
and
mean
so
like it's
that
inflating?
bag. If you travel a light year, it's like you got a light year of space out of a bag that still has 15 billion left.
You just go round and round. It's finite, but it's unbounded. It's like the
Because you
surface
have
of
a
the Earth.
process that will always yield, another iteration.
Yeah.
That real infinity. Right, but infinity isn't a number. To understand infinity is not a number. I think that this Cantor thing to me is really crucial and I don't know where it leads exactly other than for me to where I am now, but the Cantor, that also blew my mind, reading Cantor for the first time.
Oh
and
yeah,
how
that was
obvious it
incredible.
is that there's more than one kind of infinity, because I had wondered about that as a kid, and then Cantor's like, well, obviously, because there's infinite number of lines in a line segment, and there's infinite number of points in of lines in a plane, so the plane has more infinity than the line has. And through this mapping, it's a very convincing idea that, well, what you want to do is to see if two sets are the same size when they might be infinite.
But but well,
map one point to another, and you can't map all the points in a line into a plane. So
it's only the cardinality of the set that's bigger, but the concept of infinity doesn't change. They're all infinite. It's just a question of what's the cardinality of the set in question.
Am I mischaracterizing it to say that that means that there's different sizes of infinity? I mean, I can say one infinity is greater or less than in its volume than another.
I don't think that's possible. But have either of you read Flatland?
Yes, and the wonderful movie. That was another crucial thing in my life. That movie more than the story.
I did a book review on that book on my YouTube channel, and I said at the end of it that everything, all of reality has all the dimensions in it. Like, you know how it does point land and it does flat land and then space land, and then apparently there's a thought land that we don't know about. It's nice to do that, to separate the dimensions in mathematics for conception's sake. But I said in the video that reality, physical reality, has all the dimensions in it. You can't have a point, you can't have a line. If you have a rod or you have a dot, that dot has all three dimensions in it. That line has all three dimensions in it. For it to anything to exist, it has to have all those dimensions in it.
Yeah. But you don't think that that could be infinite dimensions?
You can't make an infinite line in the world.
But the thing is, but why couldn't there be infinite?
There's nothing infinite going on in the world.
No, but I'm saying, why would it
how
not
could
be
you know
great?
that?
How do we know it's not 10 or infinite? How do we not know that, depending on the definition of dimension, that when we look, we can always find another dimension? Just like if we look for another mile of space, we can always find another mile to go without turning around. We could find
for instance,
one dimension without going back up to a previous dimension.
But you couldn't know that space wasn't infinite. I mean, I don't see any problem with the view. I'm not saying it is. I don't see any contradiction in saying that the universe is infinite or eternal.
Well, there has to be some evidence for that. You can't just posit that there's a unicorn. There's a unicorn on the side of Mars, and unless you
how the hell
evidence
compare that to a unicorn? That's totally not equivalent.
Let's go back to basics, Andrew. How are you? You're using some sort of induction or something to decide that the universe would have to be finite.
I guess it has to do with the assumption I take is a metaphysical. Trying to think what the term is. A stable universe theory is that you can't have crazy metaphysics going on, or it wrecks everything. So it has to be a finite, stable universe.
Well, actually, there's nothing. I don't see anything crazy about an infinite universe.
Yeah, there's nothing crazy about having infinite digits in pi. There's nothing crazy about the Mandelbrot, the Julius set, having infinite amount of detail. It's all. I mean, this is something we could conceive of because of our mathematics. And you say mathematics is reality. I know, but it is a part of reality.
If we start discussing information, that gets more complicated because then you have to discuss relevance. If you say that every bit of information is relevant, then you're going to have well, I guess still it's not infinite. It's just overly large and it needs to be. But in terms of the physical world, which is metaphysics, you can't have infinity anywhere.
For example,
I see no
Zeno's paradox. Zeno had this idea: you can't cross the road. There's a million different ways to say it, but we'll just do the crossing the road one, because you have to cross half the road first, then you have to cross half of what's left, and half, and there's an infinite number of pieces of road to cross. And his assumption was that that would take an infinite amount of time, but it doesn't, because the amount of time it takes to transfer that distance gets smaller and smaller, and it turns out that an infinite sum, a half plus a quarter plus guess what it equals? 1. So it takes 1 unit of time to cross 1 unit of road width, and what was the problem was his conception of how infinity would have to work.
Yeah, the fact I made a video on Zeno's paradox saying the exact same thing with the convergence of partial sums in an infinite series, that because 1 and 2 are finite quantities doesn't mean you can't have a fractional infinity in between 1 and 2, like 1 plus a half plus a quarter plus an eighth.
And it's
still finite. It's still finite.
You can tell when you do these limits very convincingly. Some of the limits converge at their terminus. Some only, approach it. What is it called?
Divergent.
Methodically, and some and you could tell the difference between whether that infinite sum reaches that number or it'll go forever without ever quite reaching it, just getting closer, like approaching the speed of light. And we can tell the difference. And in the case of the Zeno's paradox, infinity is not a problem because this infinite series converges to a finite number. And you get a finite number from an infinite
Yeah,
phenomena.
that's one way of solving it. That's actually probably my preferred way of solving it. Other people have tried with Planck time, but in my opinion, discrete quantized space-time still suffers from the Zeno question of, well, how do you get from, one Planck time to the next? You still got that underlying sense of there being a paradox, but
Yeah.
it can still be solved if you've just got this series of
Well,
nows.
here's a weird thing. So this Planck time or Planck distance, it argues that there is a pixel size to the universe in some sense on one level. Like somebody brought that up earlier, that Newton didn't agree with that kind of idea. Okay, but the problem is that because of relativity, the Planck distance for me in my rest frame is not the same as the Planck distance in your rest frame because of the distortion between
Yeah,
our frames. So you don't really get away from the infinite divisibility of space with Planck time because it's more about you have a minimum amount of energy. That minimum amount of energy can only, has a minimum resolution as well. But does space really have that minimum resolution? I mean, if somebody flying by at the speed of light sees my Planck length and it's half as big, they can't tell because their Planck length won't allow them to go down to that resolution. That sounds like space is still infinitely divisible to me.
yeah. Also, you couldn't exactly pull out a ruler and check. So if you're in space, you can't exactly use a ruler to look for the smallest unit of space. That's just not going to work. So I think we need to correct our intuitions when we're thinking about Zeno's paradox and the divisibility of space. Um,
I never really understood the paradox because it seemed to me like it was already begging the question by suggesting that we travel by halves. I never understood that.
Yeah, well, he's
oh,
saying, well, okay, really what it was is,
Like it
Zeno
seems
didn't
silly.
that. I mean, anybody that thinks Zeno was actually saying the world is stuck, no, what Zeno was really doing was saying, don't trust these philosophers. They can argue anything. It's like the old thing of when a scientist had made a self-effacing joke about the bumblebee is not aerodynamically possible for it to fly. It was really about their limit of their current knowledge. People have taken that to mean something different. Really the point is he was saying, don't let these smart guys convince you you don't exist and shit. I can convince you that you can't cross the road, just go walk across one. But he's not insane. The guy wasn't like a personality disorder, didn't know he crossed roads. You know what I mean? So it was really about the weakness of logic. And in his case, I think we solved his problem with better logic, mathematics from later on.
yeah,
But it doesn't change the fact of his actual argument, which is, look, we're making a lot of assumptions. It takes us centuries to figure out what those assumptions are. So don't be so sure about your conclusion. And in my case, that means like don't assume the universe is finite. But you can easily point at me and say, well, don't assume it's infinite just because you love fractals. So we're at the point where we both have reason to pursue our intuitions or
like
impressions.
I said before, the fact that the distance between one and two is finite doesn't mean that you can't have infinite fractions, and it doesn't mean that there can't be an infinite number line.
Well, hey, so what about this? Is slight tangent. This on the number line. I used to be coming from whole numbers were the only real numbers. Blew my mind that there are rational and transcendental numbers. After Casino McCool, I actually think the opposite. Now I understand why there is irrational numbers and things like this. They come from dimensional relationships, sometimes between one dimension and another, and what seems arbitrary is the whole numbers. To me, the whole numbers look more arbitrary. This ratio of a square and a circle in a two-dimensional kind of space, and that ratio appearing in all kinds of things, to me, that's like, okay, that's actually makes sense. That's how math works. Numbers, I used to think, okay, math comes from us counting and working up, and now I think no. numbers, us counting as animals, trying to know whether if we have 3 people and 3 apples, that led us into mathematics from a real weird back alley, right?
There must be an assumption. There must be some of the, like, I haven't looked at the philosophy of mathematics, but I assume something that talks about in there is the unit the conception of a unit, a 1, is very difficult to make. You've got 2 apples. How can the 1 apple and the other 1 apple be equivalent in every way to call themselves 1? Well, it's just our way of using a concept apple. No, they're not the same size. They may not be the same color, etc. But we are considering them equivalent apples for this calculation. So you set up all your assumptions first.
Yeah, you set up your context, or in my language, kind of on the poet philosophy side, as I'm saying, you accept some illusion for the sake of argument, because information requires illusions. And you ignore the differences of the apple. But also, isn't it actually, you sound knowledgeable in this, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but so isn't it starts now with set theory, which they're working on because of the Russell paradox, but the set theory idea, it starts with, I'd love to hear this, but doesn't it start with the null set? Like the idea that I have a set with nothing in it. How many of them do I have? 1? And if I put that in a set, now I've got 2, or it's something weird like that. Little trick.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, the empty set causes a kind of Russell type paradox, because as soon as you've got an empty set, it contains itself ad infinitum, and then you get a contradiction because it's not really empty.
How can you have an empty set? Doesn't empty and set, if you put those 2 words together, they annihilate each other?
No. What it's saying is that you've got a set with no objects in it. It's like a cup. A cup is empty, but that doesn't mean that there's no cup.
That the set is the object. So the set theory is like, let's just assume sets exist. Then we get numbers by first set being empty, and then we have something to put in the set, which is the empty set, and then they draw it all from there.
But we don't define a cup as always having liquid in it. We define a set as a series of numbers, do we not? What is a set? Define a set that doesn't have the word number in it.
Yeah, no, I think you might be onto something, but no.
So a set has to have numbers in it, or it can't exist.
Not numbers, just a group of a quantity of objects.
According to Lakoff, the set is not an abstraction from nowhere. It's from our biological evolutionary experience with actual containers, and so in that sense, you would expect there to be an empty container is allowed. But just, it doesn't sound very mathematical. Mathematicians don't like to say, yeah, our idea of numbers came from counting, and our idea of sets came from a bag. They don't want to think that way, but that's
from baskets.
True. I think it's proven. I mean, Lakoff, I think, is proven. He has a book, Where Mathematics Came From. It's pretty convincing evidence of, and why Russell's paradox caused the failure that it did was sort of because the abstraction of a mathematical set.
But Russell's paradox.
Russell's paradox breaks.
It's not a problem. It's been solved.
Okay, how would you say it's been solved? When I was in school, they were starting this thing called constructibility to solve it, basically to prohibit self-reference, and I know of some attempts.
That's exactly it. It's all like all these paradoxes are all variations of self-reference and the liar and everything, but I mean I really don't see Russell's paradox as a problem. As soon as you have like a universal set, is not an object that is contained in itself. It's what it's the collection of all objects. It's
but
like
if I have a set of all things that are not France, right? That's his example, right? Isn't it the set of all things that are not France? That set is not France.
Right, yeah.
And then he uses that set to, prove A equals not A, or A implies not A, and so, okay, that's a problem. Now the answer has to be, well, you can't do that. You're not allowed to have a set that, and how would that work? Well, in Lakoff's way of looking at it is like, I don't know how you're going to figure out the mathematical answer, but the problem is that sets come from containers. And containers don't contain themselves. That's your breaking.
No, I agree. That's completely true, and that's the solution. And that's the But I mean, Russell's paradox. We all know it's intuitively. We know the solution. We know it's just a I mean, I know that it's not really a problem. It's only really a side effect of. I think it's just a side effect of language. Same with this statement is false. I'm not actually like I don't find them as real problems. I think they're just errors of language that need to be cleaned
Maybe
up.
this is
Well, I
just a
disagree
thought
with
that
the
came to
math is
mind,
not.
but
Okay, go ahead.
this is just a thought that came to mind. Maybe it's a problem of assuming that, the whole thing about the sum is more than its parts. Maybe Russell thought that the set was more than its contents, and he tried to create some other
Yeah,
existence for the
exactly.
set, or
That's
the
true.
Yeah,
life of the
well,
set.
okay, but right, historically what it was is just uh, you had the Gödel proved that you weren't going to use first order logic to define mathematics. So it's like, okay, you guys, we're going to have to make some sort of scaffolding on ourselves. How can we use first order logic to completely describe mathematics? And they came up with some clever ideas that relied on set theory. Russell, probably one of the best logicians possibly ever, terrible philosopher other than that. But anyway,
Really? I thought it was.
well, we could talk about that. I like to joke my Russell. He's a great guy. I love logicians. So it's like me saying I respect him more than anybody else in the world. Think he was terrible philosopher in the humanities and stuff. But anyway, we can't talk about that. So he came in and he just showed, hey, you guys, this little system you have, it's really beautiful. I love how you've managed to explain all of mathematics with it. But look, I'm going to do something that you'll all have to accept in sets. I'm going to define a set the same way you do with the same methodologies, but I'm going to define it in such a way and then derive a contradiction. And this is the kind of thing that makes mathematicians' heads explode. That's not what they wanted to see. All it really proves is that any of our logical systems or mathematics are going to have a problem. They're not going to have enough dimensions, or they're not going to have enough terms, or they have too many terms, or because they're always context based. You're always making some assumptions to define a context, which is accepting an illusion. And if you believe that illusion, it becomes a delusion. So, I mean, you have to accept the arbitrariness of any mathematical system you're applying. And so that's how I think that Russell's paradox doesn't matter. On the other hand, no, it's a huge phenomenal upset to mathematicians of the type that want to think that there's something pure, that they've got they want to start from axioms that are indisputable. And there is no such thing as an axiom that is indisputable.
Except for that one, right?
No,
Well, I mean, I don't. Well, obviously,
I
I
don't
don't.
see how that's an axiom that's indisputable.
No, I agree. I don't think it is. But I mean, I don't agree that there aren't axioms that are indisputable. But that aside, I mean, I don't want to.
Examples, though, right?
Yeah, I will. I don't want to. I want to go back to what we were talking about before when we were talking about set theory. Um, I had something I wanted to say, but I can't remember what it was. I think it was on uh, the set of all sets thing. Yeah, you can refer to the set of all objects, but you don't have to. Like, you can have meta objects. Like, I guess you could treat this set as a meta object, but it's not actually. It doesn't mean that you can't have a set just because you can treat it as a meta object. You know what I mean? It's not like you've. Like, I don't see a real problem with Russell's paradox. I don't think it's a real problem for mathematics. I think it can easily be resolved when you just fix problems. It's problems with the language, not the actual the logic. The logic is fine. It's just the language.
Okay, well, you lost me in that part, but what I mean, before that, it's like, yeah, you can fix mathematics and come up with a system. You can invent a language where you can't state the liar's paradox. You will always run it. When you do that, some new Russell will come along and show you, in this case that you thought it was supposed to cover, it blows it and it's got the answer wrong or something. And you always have that, I believe, and this is somewhat faithful, but you'll always have that. Now, Andrew, when I say things like that, the most general way I could explain to you is that I say there are no absolute truths, and people go, well, that's an absolute truth. No, because the terms in that sentence are not absolutely well defined. There are always details to dig into before you would ever, for infinitely away, conceivably reach this absolute truth level. So, I mean, I can say that I believe things are this way. I think that there are no axioms that can't be disputed. And to me, it's like the bag of infinite apples. It's because show me an axiom. Let's so far in experience, there is nothing that can't be questioned. It seems to me in philosophy, we've shown that ultimately everything can be questioned because of our limited nature of our brain, if for no other reason. So,
the only reason I don't agree with that is because doubt can only. I mean, I take the Wittgensteinian route that doubt and certainty go together. You have to, if you have to doubt everything, you should have to doubt the meaning of your words. You know, doubt itself carries with it. Even the notion of everything can be questioned. You have to first know what that means before.
The doubt is what the dogmatists think, because it's what the faithful worry about. Should I doubt this thing I have faith in? But that's not what the skeptics really founded their school on. They founded it on there's always more to thinking to do on a subject. There's more to learn about that subject. There's more that you can define your terms still better. Always, that you can always do that and reflect on the thing. So the whole idea that it's like doubt versus certainty, that's not even the skeptical, has no place in the skeptical universe. We don't believe in certainty. The need for doubt goes away. If you know everything's an illusion, then you're always just trying to get more information and working from the information you currently have.
So,
right?
But the thing is, Piero, like if you're always trying to find more information and you're trying to be more conceptually accurate, it seems like you're saying though that there'll never be a final end to that. But that doesn't make sense. How can there not be a final end to it?
The fact that we're always learning new things doesn't mean that there's not an immutable truth about something.
Well, I think there isn't.
I think there has to be an end.
But that's a belief.
You can't have
right?
progress without an end, because where are we progressing to?
No, I don't understand that. No, because it's like, let's say the phenomena of fingerprints. We all understand what a fingerprint is pretty much, and if we keep having babies, we're going to keep getting new fingerprints. I really don't need to learn any more about fingerprints. But if I wanted to, every single baby that's born has a unique fingerprint that I could find the information of their squiggles and their hands. I just don't care. Why? Because it's such tiny, I have no way to apply that knowledge to, I just don't care. There might be a scientist that is doing that probably, and I don't know, I do data processing. I might work for one of them, and wouldn't that be ironic? But there is infinite, there's always going to be more apples in that bag, right? I just don't care. To me, it's like every thumbprint is unique, but they all look pretty much the same to me.
They can't be unique. They can't be unique forever, though. If you, this is absurd, but if you had an infinite number of babies, then they're not all going to have unique fingerprints.
Yes, they can actually.
It's not possible.
Wait, hang on. Whoa. Say that again.
Hang on. What do you mean? Infinite in a finite universe.
First of all,
in a finite universe,
you can't have infinite babies.
Run out of new fingerprints to get.
No. We're not disputing whether you can have infinite babies in the actual world, but it's logically possible that you could have infinite babies who all had the same fingerprints.
No. If you had infinite babies, they could all have different fingerprints, because let's just say the babies get 1 inch taller every year. Their hands get a millimeter, so their fingers are getting bigger. So if you have something that looks like a repeat, it won't really be, because it'll be a bigger version of one you've seen before. You can't have infinite. If you're going to say infinite time and we have infinite babies, yes, they could also all have unique fingerprints.
Not necessarily, though.
No, they wouldn't necessarily. I'm just saying it's possible. And in a finite universe, it's very easy to see that over a species' life, they don't have to repeat. No two bodies have to repeat exactly. They can look really similar, but they won't have every hair in the same place. I mean, I don't think that's that controversial.
Have you heard of the infinite monkey theorem?
Yes.
Writing
Shakespeare.
It says almost surely. It doesn't say inevitably sooner or later you will end up getting Shakespeare. It says that you will almost surely, but there's no contradiction in infinite monkeys never typing Shakespeare. There's not even a contradiction in infinite monkeys always pressing the letter A.
Right, because it takes infinite monkeys. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I thought that that's what that other guy was.
Oh, geez, my thing was up. Do I sound better now?
You sound deeper now.
I moved my mic out of the way on my headset and forgot to move it back. But
I mean, I
we
don't.
just got to this
I
resting
don't.
place on this plateau here.
I don't see Russell's paradox, the liar paradox, Barber paradox. They're all variations of problems with self-reference. I don't see them as real problems, though. I think they can easily be solved if you
Well, I
just...
think there's a real problem, which is that the answer to all of this stuff that still won't be final, but in my opinion, I could see that it's a couple light years down the road, is that we need to look at everything as data processing over time. Everything takes time, energy, and could be looked at as data processing. This idea that you have two and you have two and they're being added, when? No, it's 2 plus 2. It's 2 plus 4 is different from 4 plus 2 because there would be time, and we have to bring in process-oriented mathematics. That's what I believe. And that's why calculus was so successful, because it starts to incorporate that. So that's where I think mathematics has to go. But this current mathematics, arithmetic, yeah, I mean, the nail is in the coffin, really. It's not the thing that people thought it was before Russell and Gödel. It's cool, and there'll be some new system that doesn't have those problems. But it turns out it is not this lovely thing that the universe works by arithmetic. That's not true.
Well, it's a category mistake to say that, to say that the universe works by arithmetic. I don't know. Like arithmetic, it's not a thing that things either work by or don't. It's just, it's just.
Well, I'm speaking historically. Maybe you would agree or disagree, but I'm just saying historically, my impression had come, and I feel I was taught this directly in philosophy classes, though, is that that's what they've been looking for. They were looking so hard and thought they found the first axioms that were self-proving, kind of like the self-cause of God, and that they could work from those and tell you everything you needed to know. Okay, and the same thing with the mathematics as a system, and especially just first-order logic, where everything is provable. They know they can prove everything. Second-order logic, oh, you're screwed. There's true statements you can't prove they're true. They don't like that. They had this thing that was complete. And Gödel proved you won't ever have a complete system, and that's the more common sense thing. You will never have a system whose rules are justified by the rules in the system. You have to have rules outside to justify it.
Yeah, but I think that internal consistency matters more than completeness.
Yeah, well, me too. I love second-order logic.
But I mean, recursion. A lot of self-reference, recursion type stuff. When mathematics loses its ontological import, it becomes meaningless. I think because something first has to exist before it can refer to itself. So I think this whole notion of something folding back in on itself, and I don't think that it's legitimate a lot of the time. I think it's a pseudo problem. A lot of the Gödel stuff. It's not. It only seems to be problematic.
Well, it's pretty well. It was pretty problematic considering there were people who thought they could use first-order logic to establish the rules of arithmetic, and that isn't possible, and that's why they had to come up with some sort of set theory, a bigger theory. Now, why don't you have a liar's paradox in first-order logic? Because you're not allowed to refer to statements. You can't say this statement is false in first-order logic. So they were like, well, here's how we'll get over the liar's paradox. In mathematics, unlike natural language, you're not allowed to make these second-order statements. If we can prove all of mathematics in first-order logic, they felt like they would have had their little concrete answer to look at the universe. It's mathematical. These are the a priori truths. Okay, when that failed, you couldn't do that. Then you're going to have to define arithmetic in some sort of second order or other system that allows things like the liar's paradox. They came up with set theory that was supposed to be with some middle ground that didn't have a liar's paradox, that justifies the math, that minimizes the assumptions you have to make for your axioms, which they are very good at. And then Russell comes along and proves that that has a self-referent, that the self-reference is a problem in there. And so this is this unsolved problem, and it's not just like current history, it's like they've been trying to battle this out since Pythagoras, almost, you know,
Yeah,
in a
well,
sense.
I don't think that a lot of self-referential paradoxes actually present a problem for logic. You know, I don't think they present a problem for the laws of logic. I think it's just a problem with their conceptual
Yeah, for the
misunderstanding.
formalism. But are you saying there is a formalism that would avoid that? I'm saying any formalism you come up with, it's not going to be a bad thing for logic. Logic is just one idea to the next. It's these formalisms where we're trying to describe and limit what good logic is, and we see how many things can we express in the real world from that. And I don't think there'll ever be a perfect formalism, I guess. So you see what I'm saying? I mean, are you saying that it's not a
Yeah.
problem for math because they'll figure out the perfect formalism after?
I think they will. I'm a kind of formalist myself, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Why wouldn't you think so, Piero? Why won't you think eventually we'll get to the truth of any matter? Eventually.
Well, it's just like you were saying. It's just math and reality. You know, one is about, you know, they talk about each other, but they can't map perfectly. They're not really meant to.
Well, we need
you
to.
see mathematics as always taking a slice of the world. There's like a context. Taking a context.
Yeah,
we,
seems obvious.
we need to pin down what it is exactly that we're talking about. You know, like if we talk about mathematics, or, you know, to me mathematics is just logic, right? It's just relation seeking.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's just this means the same thing as that. Like a lot of people think, well, 2 + 2 = 4. Addition occurs in time. It's a causal relationship, when in fact it's like two Venn diagrams and 4's in the middle. It's not so much that they give rise to 4.
No, but see, there we're getting into one reason I think that your mathematical system will always be distorted, because nature has time inherently in it. When you decide to ignore time, yeah, you can do that, and it allows you to do all of these great logic. But that's a big ignoring. That's a big context. That's acceptance of a big illusion that ultimately will have a ramification in your logic, because it's wrong.
Wrong with reference to what? Because I mean
that there is no such thing as a timeless moment. There is no such thing as a single moment that you could freeze time at, even conceptually.
Well, I mean, obviously there is time. It takes time to do addition, like temporally, but just.
But there are no points of time. There are no points of time. It's like, why did math do so badly at physics that Newton had to invent calculus? Was because it had the line was made of points, and he was like, well, that doesn't work. You have to have the line made of line segments, and time is like that. There's little line segments of time. There's no evidence that you could have a zero-dimensional one that was a point. It's always something's always happening in a little segment of time. Things have changed, so you don't freeze it.
That's in nature, though, right? I mean, obviously with applied mathematics, if we abstract away the notion of a square, we can analyze the relations.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can I just interrupt and ask it this way, and then maybe you can answer this? So we are creating a logical system, and we're going to say time doesn't matter in that logical system. What kind of errors would you expect in the logical results of that system?
What do you mean?
By ignoring time.
All right. Obviously, yeah, sure.
Time plays a role in a lot of things, and so what subset of our problems as living creatures, or just questions, you know, what subset can be answered without respect to time?
Well, that's when you're doing applied mathematics. Like, obviously, you could get contradictory. You could get problems when you're trying to reapply mathematics to the natural world. I don't dispute that at all. But within the boundaries of what it is that you're talking about, you can still arrive at relations inside that system that you're working with. But that's not a problem for mathematics. That's just a problem for physicists. Like when you're reapplying mathematics to the natural world.
Well, it depends on what claims you're trying to make about mathematics.
I think what he's saying is that
What? Like, is it more
mathematics.
important? Yeah.
I think what he's saying is that mathematics deals in coherence only. Coherence only. It's a self-contained system in the middle of nowhere. It's input output. It generates answers.
Hmm.
I think that's
And
what he's.
what's outside it is of no relevance to what's inside it. That's my point. Like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't actually matter.
Well, see, I disagree. I think mathematics and all mathematical like concepts that we apply came out of evolution and running the body and reality. They're all about actually solving the problems of a mammal or animal in nature, and that its realm is the real world for all of that logic, and that we should accept ignoring time as an illusion that we do because, you know, it's just like ignoring the difference between the two apples. Well, then we can buy and sell apples, for God's sake, and they're similar enough that that's a worthy thing to ignore in order to be able to have a place I can go get an apple that's edible. Right, so we ignore these things, but we shouldn't pretend we're not ignoring them or that they're somehow more fundamental and real. I would argue all that is real, we do have access to something that defines all that is real, and it's our stream of information that we're getting. That's all that is real. That is the real thing. When you have mathematics, it is a language for describing patterns in that stream. It's for describing patterns in that stream, and so if you make a mathematical statement and it coheres with your experience, fine. But mathematics, if it makes a statement that doesn't cohere with that experience, then the mathematics is just wrong. It's just wrong. You can't say, but it's right in its own universe. It's like, well, this is the universe. Math is a part of this universe. There is no giving math its own universe. I don't want to do that.
But the relations in that system, without reference to what's outside it, like for example, if we had if we abstract away the idea of a square, and then like all squares in the physical universe just suddenly cease to exist, we're already talking about a square. We're referring to it, so we can still discover relations about its identity without reference or relevance to what's actually happening in the changing flux of nature and how confusing it might be. So
yeah, well, I mean, I understand that argument.
That's basically what I'm saying, is that obviously when you're reapplying it, it's different, but that's not a problem for me or for mathematicians.
But this is what I'm saying too about how my views change, because I totally see where you're coming from, because I have always agreed with that as well, and the applied mathematics, and I always viewed it as a going back and forth. But right now I don't think that anymore. There is no world of math that you're going back and to and from. It's this: you are the universe at your location. Mathematics is a phenomena going on in your physical brain, in the physical location where you are when you're thinking or doing mathematics or applying mathematics or not applying it. If you're just thinking about something as abstract as possible, it's still taking time. It's going on in your physical neurons. And so there is no going back and forth. When you apply mathematics, it's just like applying any other idea. You're just acting on having seen a pattern or not. It's not like when you're not applying it, you're in this mathematical universe. You know, see what I'm saying?
Well, it doesn't. You don't necessarily have to believe that there's actual, invisible forms or whatever. But I guess what I'm trying to say here
that is what I'm getting at. Is I'm rejecting that, but you get that. Yeah,
no,
I know. You're not advocating that either. Yeah, no, I get it. No, we all three, I think, have very modern versions of some different classical approaches, but they're all updated. What we three have been talking about, we're disagreeing, but they're all updated. Like, you can hold out your mathematical faith. You're obviously informed about Russell's paradox. It means something different to me, but you know what I mean? We're all updated, and yet we're all coming from kind of three, this finitude, and things have to be settleable on the one hand. But none of us, I don't think, are taking a naive approach that like ignores the problems. So,
no, I mean, I've definitely, I've heard the objections, and I'm trying to work with them because, well, I think a lot of people have problems with things like mathematics because they think, well, if quantity is just a construction of the human brain, then mathematics is uncertain, when in fact mathematics is just dealing with the relations inside quantity and it doesn't actually care where it comes
Yeah.
from or what's outside it, and that's
Right.
all that matters to me.
Yeah, and see, we're coming to different things, but I love putting it that way. Exactly, it is. It's like an internal relationship. In that sense, you could say mathematics is this concrete thing because it's making statements. You can make statements with it about internal consistency, and I do agree. Internal consistency is, as a relativist, that's one of the things we have a handle on. Like people say, relativists, moral, ethical relativists can't judge other people, but I can for sure judge them based on their own system. If he says, you know, adultery is wrong, and then he goes and does adultery, you know, internal consistency it's real. So I don't have to agree with him. He doesn't have to agree with me, you know. And then beyond that, I don't think that, you know, people say they believe things they don't really believe, obviously. And so anyway,
That's the
internal
only
consistency is a real thing, and mathematics is about that.
that's the only special case. Like all truth sort of reduces to really just an identity relationship. You're saying it's this way because it's that way, and
Yeah.
that's what we label as true. Do I quote unquote believe that? Well, again, how could I be wrong about that unless it's not that way? It's like you'd have to identify a contrary way. Like when we're already talking about something, the whole notion of truth. It's almost like the law of identity is like meta true, because it's like all truth statements sort of reduced to it. It's what something, if something's true, then it means it's identifying
Yeah.
how it is.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I think it fails. I mean, and why it's failing us now in some sense, even though it remains useful, because this law of identity is the fundamental thing in mathematics where, you know, in calculus, or just by assigning time to the variable t, you can sort of reintroduce time into math, right? But in the law of identity, you have A equals A. And I'm sorry, that is supposed to be about I am me. And
Well,
I'm different by the time by the time I go A equals A has changed. So the A
sure,
on the
but
left
you're
is not the
still
same as the A on the right. Oh, because there's time. No, there's no time, so we're ignoring time. And the fact is, things are constantly changing, and thus you have the identity of a river isn't real because it's changing. And so that's what it's missing.
but
It's
yeah,
missing the
but I
fact
mean,
that
this is
of continuity. It doesn't take continuity into account, even though it seems like it's about continuous functions. To me, there's this inherent discreteness between mathematics and reality.
but identity is just like whatever, like, you know, whatever it is that you're actually referring to. Like, I mean, even time has an identity, right? I mean, even if the thing
I understand
changes,
that. I
yeah,
understand that, but to me that's like forcing, you know, the Ptolemaic circles onto, you know, the paths. I mean, you can think of things that way, but it fails. And identity, if you want to use the word, I mean, it has to be based not on this unchanging something, which is the phrase they always use in philosophy, you know, courses. But it's, you know, it's the identity. If you want to talk about identity, what's the identity of an ocean wave as the wave comes in? You know, that has to be
well,
our
once,
concept of
yeah,
identity, something always changing that is not actually consisting of its material at the moment.
yeah. I mean, if I look outside and if it's sort of, if there's grey area, or if it's, you know, fuzzy to determine if it's raining or if it's not raining, once the nature of the reference is made clear, and once we've pinned down what it is that we're talking about, as soon as I say A, I've automatically given it, and before I even say equals, as soon as we're already referring to something, when I say A, whatever I'm about to predicate of that will be true or false depending on what I've already identified. And to say that it is A is just the same as saying that I mean, that is what all truths.
Yeah, no, and we get all this rich logical system from it. I'm just saying that, okay, so, but the illusion is that that's somehow real or has its own reality in a world,
So,
you know,
Hero,
that's the
you're saying
illusion. The
that
fact is, things have this identity over time, and you could see it elsewhere, like the conditional and logic. There's no actual connect. A implies B has nothing to do with A being related to B. It has nothing to do with it.
it sounds like you're saying that time matters when you say that A equals A, but does it matter? Because, like, I think the ocean wave is a good example. So you say A is your ocean wave, and an ocean wave is an ocean wave, and it's not saying that the ocean wave. It's not saying that the existence of the ocean wave is the existence of the ocean wave. It could dissipate in a second, but I think it's just talking about the nature of an ocean wave is
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah,
It's
it's
not,
got
the
not.
time part doesn't matter. It's not, we're not trying to say that the ocean wave, we're freezing it we're freezing the ocean wave in time, and then since we've frozen it,
Yeah.
we've destroyed its
If you
properties. I
act
don't
like
think that's
time
the
doesn't
point.
matter, you act like time doesn't matter, you get a lot of notational power out of it. But time does matter, is all I'm saying. So that's why one reason our current mathematics is for sure limited explaining reality.
It matters with respect to what though? Because
Well,
if
for example, in first order logic here. So in first order logic, when you have if A then B, it doesn't mean what we normally think, because if A is let's see, how does it work again? So if A is true and B is true, then the conditional will be true. If A is false, then the conditional is true even if B is true or false. Doesn't matter.
yeah, yeah,
So here's the thing. That means that if put it back in regular language, it's like if the moon is made of cheese, I am made of bacon, right? And that's just as true as like, or no, this way. If the moon is made of cheese and I go to the moon and I eat the moon, I will eat bacon. That's true because the moon isn't made of cheese. But in reality, when we're talking about that, I'm saying if I could do a time travel and do this, there's a relationship. Like the proper thing is if the moon's made of cheese and I went to the moon and I ate the moon, I would eat cheese. That is because there's a relationship between A and B. And why is that totally ignored? Well, I think it's ignored because of this idea of things are what they are. If you have things are what they are, there is no time is the thing that makes relations. A
but
photon at this point is here, goes over there, then goes over there, relating all those items requires time, real relationships in the real world. So you have math, which is all about describing relationships, and relationships being all about time. So
the
leads to all
most
kinds of problems.
the most fundamental thing in all mathematics and logic would be modus ponens. If A then B, A therefore B. But that already presupposes like that the skeleton of that, the framework of that has the laws of logic implicitly built into it. Like if I say if the moon is made of cheese and I go to the moon and eat the moon, then I will be eating cheese. That's true regardless. I mean, it's a valid argument regardless of whether or not it's sound.
Right.
Validity is the more fundamental
Yeah. And you can't
part.
make that statement in first order logic, which is what they've tried to limit math to. So that's this disconnect where you can go a really long way, but there's a reason, we might need different forms of mathematics to
Yeah, well,
So
I
anyway,
mean, I
hey, you guys, I need to take a break, or maybe we could finish. It's been 2 hours. If you want, I can leave the room open and come back and see if you guys are still here or anybody else has shown up, and maybe we could do another hour. But I want to take a break at the moment. Are you guys ready to go, or you think you might want to stick it out some more? Or?
I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. I might think about
Well,
it.
we could play it by ear. I'm gonna smoke a cigarette for 10 minutes or so, less probably. And if you guys are back here, because I would like to leave the room open too. Sometimes when I take a break, people have been watching show up or whatever. So I give people room to talk because I do talk too much. So you guys are pretty good. Yeah, feel free to interrupt me. I know I can go on a spiel, I think. So, but this has been fun. So, well, I'll leave the room open. If you guys are here in 10 minutes, I'll be back. We can keep going. If you're all gone, then I'll take the hint. And,
I'll take 10 as well, but I'll be
okay.
still around.
Okay,
Yeah.
see you in a bit.
Right.
I'll leave my camera on so
Can I ask a question, you guys? If someone there. Okay.
Let's take a little break, a little bit longer, but I'm back. But I'm gonna look at my computer for a sec. So I'm going mute. And then I was gonna answer the question about what's the whole little history of our chat group world here on YouTube. Ooh, Stugs are in the house. Okay, I thought waiting around, leaving for a bit might bring in a few of the stragglers. Did you finish your own hangout or something? Hey, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Right
So,
there, Pyro.
hey. You know, I have a kind of a question for you. I've done this thing where I invented this joke where, that's now spread out. The kids are all saying it, evidently. I must have invented it. Maybe I got it from a kid. Who knows? Where, the conservatives always say the liberals like to call everything racist, so that's just what you do. And I heard these comedian politicians, with their blogs or whatever, they were talking, and one of them said their kid, she asked her kid to take out the garbage, she says, "That's racist." And so we're doing that all the time. Like when it's inappropriate, or just if somebody says, anything, or it might not even have to do with race, or like you're taking out the garbage. And I think it's really good. It turned out it was just like, okay, the conservatives going to say we call everything racist, and then so I just started calling everything racist, and it really suited me. I like it. And then, so what I was going to ask you is, so now Liverpool, there's, what was that term? I remember you were arguing with somebody, and somebody actually called, and I wondered, how much of it is like an N-word, oh, this is really terrible, and how much is it, or also recently came up for Scottish, was this term jock, which I never knew was derogatory, scouser.
Yeah,
That's what I said.
Scouser.
How bad is scouser? Is that like, oh, I'm going to kill you now, or is it just like, oh, yeah?
No, we take pride in that word. It's like, we're Scouts.
And so, like, jock, for Scotsmen, jock was a similar thing, took pride in it, but now it's more like nigger or something. Yeah, or no?
I think I think any word can be pointless. I think it's the intention behind the word that kind of annoys most people.
Well, in Hawaii, we're called haoles, the whites, and sometimes it's fighting words, right? I mean, yeah, haole, get out of here. And then sometimes a little old lady is teaching hula to your kids and says, "Oh, I've never taught a class full of haoles."
Oh, wow, that's weird. Racist.
Racist. Now, the fun thing about calling everything racist is then we in our family are talking more about actual racism, and then also I do it to my conservative relatives, and so the ones with a sense of humor have started to get it. Some of them are like, "Why are you doing that?" Still, but some of them are getting it, and I can talk about race with them. And then when they inevitably say something that actually is racist, I'm allowed to say it since I'm saying it all the time, and it takes off the sting. I like it. So the Scouser wouldn't be racist. I mean, obviously somebody could say it, but they'd probably be coming out of the 50s because anybody from Liverpool would be going, pride, word.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I think everybody's got pride where they live, like the city or
some of these racist or whatever slurs, whatever you want to call that kind of slur, they really are like insults out of the Middle Age. Like your mama wears combat boots. Now, if someone said that to you, really trying to piss you off, you might get pissed off just because you knew he was being an asshole. But really, it doesn't. You're not like, oh, that hurts so much. And so if somebody calls you a haole, it's not like, well, I could see you're being an asshole, but it's not really like I give a shit about the word haole. I actually like it.
Well, it's actually the same way for a nigger. It's not the fact, it's the word that's annoying. It's who's saying it's probably annoying even more because you know why they're saying it. So, like if someone said it, I mean, think about it, right? White people say it. Well, my white friends say it, right? And it's not offensive, put it that way. So if it comes from someone who literally means it, yeah, you're probably gonna get slapped. So but I think the intention is the problem, not so much the word.
But you could get a slap for anything, right? Like to cut in line or whatever.
If I called you about a hoe, you'd probably slap me for that. That's just as insulting as saying any other word.
You can say all kinds of words with the tone of voice.
If you say something like, "Oh, it's rude to call people niggers," that doesn't mean that you can't exactly say that word was problematic because it was the context in which I was talking about it. I wasn't using it in a derogatory way. It's
nowhere there's off limits. It's just who says it and why they're saying it. That's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah, and then it's not off limits. It's just like, oh, we're going to have a conflict. It wasn't off limits. It just means that you're a jerk. Yeah, well, I think the thing is, too, though, I was also saying, like, in the 21st century here, let's say you're working with somebody, and he's some ethnicity or from some town. Yeah, I think any modern semi-intelligent person knows they've lost the argument. If you're working with an asshole that happens to be African-American or from Liverpool or Scottish or American from California, you call him an asshole. John, you don't do your work and you're lazy. You don't go, you're a Howley, because that's pointless. That's not really what his problem was. You've just lost the argument. You've just come up with the insult that says, I have nowhere to go with this. I don't really know why you're an asshole. I don't actually have a good reason. So why would you do that? You know? It's just naive, is my point. It's like an insult that the reason it's still a problem is not because it should hurt. It's because
it's used by stupid people.
Yeah, who's trying to be an asshole. He's trying to be an asshole, and where are you going to go? Well, you failed. You're not an asshole. It's like, okay, well, usually when people try to be an asshole, they succeed at that. I mean, that's why they do it. It's one thing you can succeed at really easy. So
interesting.
Anyway, but anyway, evidently, and my stepson thinks that he invented the joke, and I'm telling him, no, I invented it, and then we're finding out all these other kids are doing it. I think there's a little mini phenomena. It is
I know lots of people actually say it. I mean,
oh yeah,
it is funny though. Like, for saying it for no apparent reason, like it was like it could be anything. You know, like you don't eat McDonald's, racist. You know, it's just. Like,
oh, I gotta go now. I gotta go now. Oh, well, you're racist then. Yeah. Because and I think it takes some of the sting off. We need to and it actually helps the conservatives. It's like, look, this is a way to, you know, we can make a joke out of it. We don't want you to feel like you can't say what you think. You know what I mean? So we've gotta let it happen. But
I think
it's also taking the piss out of them as well, which is quite.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And then exactly.
I think the best way to solve racism is to simply stop talking about race. That's what Morgan Freeman said. Because
that's a good
point. The more we dwell on race, the more excuse we're giving people to say, "Oh, you're just doing that because I'm white or because I'm black or because whatever." You know, like if you dwell on race, you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't be having to apologize all the time, because all you're doing is strengthening the illusion of race as an actual thing, you know?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, it's kind of funny because in the UK we kind of don't use the word race anymore. We use the word ethnicity, which is just, to me, I mean, it's just a posh way of saying something. But, I've never
political correctness gone wrong.
Yeah, I've never grew up really with the whole.
Correct, actually.
You guys watch Stuart Lee? You guys know Stuart Lee?
No, who's that?
Oh, he's he was a punk comedian from the 90s, and he's a great liberal British comedian, Stuart Lee, and he has jokes, like he goes on one about how he hates immigrants, not immigrants, move into the former British colonies, and what do you got there? Do you like the newspapers? No, there's no news. Dude, there's no news. What do they got? Shrimp. They got shrimp that are as big as 5 British shrimp. And he's like, well, I just stayed in the UK and eat 5 times as many shrimp. But he's really, like, some of his jokes are, he'll tell jokes the audience doesn't get, so he can act like the audience is just stupid. Then he'll go over explain. He's great. He's like an avant-garde comedian that has had some success, partly because the internet allowed him to have like a rediscovery in the 2000s. But he's just funny. I forget, why was I thinking of him? Something we were just saying was reminded me of one of his jokes, but I forget. Yeah, Stuart Lee, you should check him out. He's pretty good. Super liberal, goes over the top with it, but not. But kind of an angry liberal, so a little bit, you know, he doesn't curse quite the same way as Bill Hicks, but he's definitely he's coming from the punk sensibility, but now he's 60, but, you know, he's coming from this punk underground world and kind of, you know, alternate comedy or alternate / whatever. So, but from our previous generation of underground, so he's funny.
Where is everybody anyway?
Huh?
Where is everybody?
Well, it's been us talking about various cool abstract philosophical concepts. It's here, Andrew, and this is all we had. We had one guy sitting in, Baltazar left that didn't say anything. But, hey, Andrew, are you back? I see you unmuted. I was gonna go. I was gonna answer your question about the brief history of YouTube.
Oh,
and
yeah.
chat. So back in the day, there was a Stick'em, which allowed for the group chat, and Gary did that. There's an old guy who's a conspiracy theorist on YouTube. Von Helton had a big room, and and there were a few philosophy rooms that were just naturally there, but mostly it was for people to cam horn to each other, and then they started charging, and then Gary went and used this one called Tiny Chat, and then he has no control. It's too hard to police. He has too many trolls now, and so that's why he's using the Google Hangouts. And so, I mean, that's the brief history of how it's going. I've been going into Gary's rooms. I mean, I've been talking to Gary. We've all been, the Gary group goes back like 8 or 9 years, and Stizork's coming in 6 to 8 years. And, you know, so really this group is a bunch of 5 to 9 years. We've been discussing things on YouTube, and what, I don't know, about 5 or is all ago, people discovered the Stick'em. You know, because before then there was no way to do video chat with multiple people. There weren't services.
It was literally just
and
Stick'em.
even Stick'em lost money doing it, and that's why they were just one of these companies where you get that where some investors fund them till they realize it's not going to work. But Google Hangouts is going to work because we're getting HTML5, where soon we're all going to be sending this video straight to each other, so you don't need a big server to run a chat space. So,
was
Gary
Mr.
was one of the
Cropper ever
first.
a part of that? And how did you, or what was your, like, how did you find him or talk to him at all?
I'm sure it was because of the objectivism, and then I have a strong liking for Mr. Cropper. I like people like him that have the courage of their convictions and don't just say, and he has a strong character. I always thought, this is a dude, he wants to teach kids, even though he's teaching them some things I wouldn't like when it gets into that. He's going to teach real math, and I thought, as a matter of fact, I'm really curious what happened to him. Do you still know anything about him? I might have lost. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
So probably somehow ran into. I used to make a lot of videos on objectivity and subjectivity, and of course subjectivism always comes up in that. And plus, I might even search on Ayn Rand and stuff every once in a while. I've always had an interest with her stuff. I don't like her, never have, but I like Robert Heinlein a lot, and it turns out there's a big overlap in people that, because he's another one of these just novelists that has a bunch of philosophy and Tanstoffel and ideas that he obviously
like Moon. In Moon, right?
In which one?
In Moon is a Harsh Mistress?
Yeah, is that where he used that? Is that the first one he used that in?
Yeah, probably that's the one.
Yeah, and he repeats a lot of his concepts. So anyway, there's a lot of overlap. I always found that interesting because I believe I'm a Heinlein. You know, I overlap with him as much as any other philosopher in that he's even though his pulp novels it is philosophy, and so I'll search on that kind of stuff and run into that. I'm always curious about the Ayn Randian subculture, its relationship with libertarianism, her views on libertarianism as opposed to some people that consider themselves Randian and don't understand her statement about their problem with libertarians. And it's very interesting. I've always been very interested in.
I hate to say it, I've been a part of the I don't know if there's really an objectivist community, but there's certainly a big Facebook group. There's a huge Facebook group. I'm not sure how many thousands of people are in it, but I got recently kicked out of that a few months ago for daring to want to study Ayn Rand in an academic setting. But they don't like that because they think academia probably distorts her work, and in some ways that's true. But I hate to say it, but in my experience, objectivists tend to be jerks. Like they tend to be unlikable people. They're very dogmatic, and they are Randians. There's very much. It's not about that. What's Rand's contribution to? Like, we don't think that Aristotle said everything right.
Right.
So why would we think that Ayn Rand said everything right? That's my big dispute. But saying that gets you kicked out of any objectivist community at all, which I think is really ridiculous.
You know what? I just realized with Rand, I'm guilty of with Rand what we were talking about earlier, where I will dismiss her based on her biography. I'm such a fucking hypocrite.
Well, a lot of people did actually. I think
No, it's fair at some point to bring it in. So maybe I am being a hypocrite, but I did admit earlier you could bring it in. Just don't bring it in first. You know, I didn't start off reading her biography to trash her. I've read a lot of her essays and then eventually a novel.
That's why I think it's unfair to just, you know, read the biography first, because then it, yeah.
Well, in her case, I think one of the ways of me not despising her as much as I used to, I do, you could say I do, but I wouldn't say that, but is that, you know, like I discovered from reading her stuff that she was a romantic. I'm like, why is she always on objectivity, objectivity? This is obviously a part of the romance movement, you know, believing in character and human special human beings and heroes and villains, and this it is a viable way of looking at the world. It didn't just create literature, and it wasn't just fake, and she's a part of that, and she's always calling objectivity, made me hate her. And then I read her, she had some interviews where she knew she worked in romance. That's not what she wasn't saying. She didn't believe in heroes. Yeah, what she calls objectivity is modernized or whatever romantic theory about good people and bad people and the kind of character flaws people fall into, and it's on that emotional level, and she wasn't actually lying about that. She knew that, and so in a way it is sort of the Ayn Rand Institute that has this idea that, well, we're about this, we're just logicians, we're Bertrand Russell, and it's like, no, that's not. She was a poet philosopher, you know, like so many good philosophers are, and that's fine. And you understand her that way, it's more forgivable. The other thing is there is this thing of if you try to academically deal with it, they don't want to do it. And it makes a self-fulfilling prophecy of why, you know, I am from academia enough, I guess, that I don't take her seriously as a philosopher because I think she's not engaged. It's this isolated movement that's not meant to engage philosophically, level playing field, and that's what philosophy entails to me, is that you go onto the philosophical battleground and, you know, you do all of those analysis and comparisons, and there's various techniques, and you get to invent your own techniques that make you look like you come out on top. So it's fair, it's always fair, and I do feel there's a resistance to that.
Yeah, I'm more interested in analytic philosophy and the kind of more rigorous academic approach to, you know, like I prefer that we start with the classics, or we use the right terms, and I get called an elitist for it by Gary, when in fact I think that people who are too scared of that simply don't want to be pinned down to a definite position. They want to. I think they're too scared. Like they'll accuse you of being an elitist, when in fact you're just trying to clarify things.
Yeah. Well, take the whole atheist thing. My thing of not, and I haven't really ever gotten involved with it because my current starting question nobody is cutting up to, which is, if you're going to ask me if God exists, then tell me what you mean by God.
Yeah.
And if somebody comes up with a thing, they can have an infinite bag of these things, and not one of them makes any traction.
That's why you're an atheist, though, Prado, like me.
And so, but it's just what it's just what.
It's common sense, really, isn't it? It's like, well, explain what it is, and then I can agree. But if you can't tell me what it is, then I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Sorry about that.
Well, yeah, but it's not a gotcha. It's like, if you're asking me, does the wombat exist? And I go, wombat. He says, well, you're a biologist. And I'm like, well, I'm not familiar with the wombat. And if it's a real creature, then they show you pictures and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, I'll give me some time and I'll figure out if that is around here. And if you don't have any pictures, any clues, anything to check,
at all.
Yeah, and so what is theism really about? If I look at theism and say, well, what is it really about? What are you really asking? Since you won't define God, you're being shy about it, you must have some idea. It's like, the question is really, is there something to worship?
Nope.
If you believe there's something to worship, then you're some form of theist. I worship Mother Nature. I worship this, I worship that. And that's what it really means, and that's why I'm against it, because I don't think, if God created me, that doesn't mean I have to worship him. My parents created me, and worshiping them would be a really bad idea.
It's an interesting point, though, to say, like, to ask the question, like, define God for me, and then I'll consider it, because why there's so many theists in the world, then, if they can't answer that question for themselves? It seems to me the answer is there's so many theists because it's a cultural indoctrination thing. It's not an intellectual thing.
Well, also, you ask every theist, what's God? They will all give you a different interpretation of what they think God is.
Yeah.
Depending on what book they've read. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean,
But
hello.
Okay, but if you want to know what kind of a
if-
person you're talking to, forget that they're theists. You can ask them, because if God is love and God is these things, then it either says what they're like or they're covering up for their like. So
Yeah.
God is love. It's either a loving person that uses God to find love, or a theist that is unloving and is using the theism as cover for the fact that they're the opposite. And so it's really interesting to ask people. So because you can also, I mean, there's people about God is hate, and they're actually loving people. And again, it's the opposite. It's cover for the fact that they're softies.
Yeah.
So they become stoics in their you know, and also if you get into cultures where it's all about the Virgin Mary, or it's sort of a, you know, it's about the pomp and circumstance and costumes in some religions, and you find out a lot about, because everybody's into their religion for a different philosophical reason.
Yeah.
Religious people are crazy. That's all I know. Not medically.
Well, we're all crazy. We're all crazy.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying is that's a form of craziness I never would wish on anybody, to be quite frank.
But there's actually a view called agnosticism, which is when, you know, it's so vague that you can't even pin it down, the concept of God. But I mean, obviously, when someone says the word God, the word itself has to map to something if it's to even function as a word. Obviously, when people say, "Well, God is love," I think they mean something more than just love. They must, like, there's extra baggage like tied to that.
Yeah.
It's not just synonymous. It's like
It's not. There's actually no word, but they use God as some overarching view of planet Earth and existence itself, and then just put love in there as a placeholder for, well, I don't know, but I'm going to think it's this, which is a nice fluffy word.
Basically, language, I mean, religion as we know it is just a language, kind of philosophical language that people can speak in, and two Christians can think totally different things, but they'll both put it in these words, Jesus and stuff like that. If you want to understand religion, I actually don't think it's very difficult. I think you need to look at this geopolitical Nietzsche. There's a lot of good examples of people that have gotten into the institutions and stuff. But in terms of why, really, I think it's a matter of, look, we have lots of feelings. We don't know what they all mean. When we as animals don't know what a feeling means, we assign all kinds of metaphysical things to it. Yeah. So like love at first sight and stuff. We're just now coming to an understanding that this is some sort of biochemical thing, and the genes trying to make us fall in love. I mean, even up till now, people still do think, no, it's fate, and God wants us to be together, and Sheila, and all these illusions that we buy, thinking that it's metaphysical, because we don't understand the feeling, and so we're deluded by it. Instead of knowing there's an illusion to it and going, ooh, she makes me hot, but I'm not going to trust myself that she's the one, or God is sending me to her.
You make me laugh because it's so true in the sense of that way as well. You can think of it like as the whole world, though. I mean, once upon a time, we literally, the biggest illusion was standing on it.
Even
standing on it. You know,
even hunger. Imagine being an animal, a human being, but 200,000 years ago, even hunger. What is that? It doesn't feel like food is missing. Sure, your behavior starts looking for food. What is that? It's an evil spirit punishing you for not picking and
washing
eating
the dishes.
You never know. Okay, so up to the spirituality, just to finish, I believe there's a spiritual feeling. A spiritual experience is really just what was ever going on when you had that feeling, and it's like hunger, or lust, or any of these feelings. They all have their own meaning. There's some hook up to reality through evolutionary and biological process. But when we don't know what that hookup is, we usually think it's like ghosts and spirits. So that's where we are with this spiritual feeling. Okay, so people have this feeling. They innately can recognize that's what it means for it to be a feeling. They have no name, no logic, no words about it practically, except God.
Hey, Pal, you know what that... I was just going to say, it reminds me of the Year One film. Have you seen the film? It's so stupid.
Oh, no, I wanted to see it, though. It looks good.
It's basically what you're saying, like where they're picking berries and shit, and God and evil. It's just like that. It's like, you know, it's only the lack of knowledge that gives you illusions of stuff, right?
Well, there's an innocence to that, too, because back in the day, they weren't saying that those spirits were real. They didn't even have to ask that question. They were in this world of their own dream space, and that's what the world seemed like. And if it's a tree, or the tree seems like it's talking to you, or any of that, it's a part of the world. They didn't make a distinction. So they weren't saying it's really out there. They didn't even ask if there was an out there. They just had their experience.
Yeah.
So it's totally innocent, their version. It's not so
Well,
innocent
the
now,
well
but people have
the
to lie to
Aborigines.
themselves to believe
Yeah,
it.
the Aborigines call their ancient past dream time. You know, that's
Yeah.
literally what the Aborigines call their
Mhm.
ancestors' history and stuff.
That's
So
racist.
racist.
It's interesting, Piero, how you don't make a distinction between, like how you were talking about those people who didn't make a distinction between the world in here and the world out there. It was
Mhm.
just all one big experience. Like
Mhm.
um, it was not until Descartes that we really got that duality and division between me and everything else.
Stuff, yeah.
And
Well, I
also,
think on paper, but obviously the Greeks and everybody was touching in on that. I mean, the skeptics, I like the skeptics because they had the noumena, the whole thing that Kant went into. I mean, they had that noumena, you know,
yeah.
and nomina or whatever, and so they were. That's what makes the Greeks so kind of cool. Even though there's lots of cool ancient stuff, they really invented some of these cognitive ideas that separated us from the world in a good way.
To me though, we aren't separate from the noumenon. We are, in a sense, we can't, like I said before, we can't be separate from how things are.
Yeah.
How things seem
Right.
as a way, like illusions exist, right?
Yeah.
It's still part of what there is.
No, I agree. Yeah, no, and but here's the funny thing about that, and it relates to what we're talking about with math. Is so exactly. So we are the thing that exists. We are really one of them. So what we're feeling is the thing that's existing. On the other hand, we can't process that without creating this illusion, or it was already created just because of the way our brain is shaped. Maybe another brain wouldn't have to have this idea of separating it into the thing, the action, the agent in the verb, the subject and the object and the verb. We have to separate it out, and it makes it look like we're separate from the universe. But we've done enough science now to realize, oh wait, I'm not a spirit in some other universe. I am a brain in this universe, so it must be unified. You can look at the whole thing logically and go, obviously it's unified. I'm seeing it. This phenomena is happening in this body together.
Yeah.
That's proof of unification. We're just asking, well, how is it unified? And we're not going to escape looking at it as separate, really. I think we're stuck
exactly.
with that.
And yeah, it's just like the Ouroboros, the snake which is chasing its own tail, right? It goes back, I mean, consciousness, it goes back to self-reference again, because we're always stuck. Like, everything ultimately has to terminate with our own mind. Like, even when we refer to our mind, there's always an aspect of our mind that we're not aware of. Like, we're never going to be. Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I don't think that we'll ever have a truly satisfactory solution to the hard problem of consciousness, because we're already stuck with our consciousness, and it's trying to understand itself from inside. And there's always going to be that incompleteness in our knowledge, that a cognitive closure.
What is the hard problem? That starts to be confusing to me. Go ahead. What? I didn't hear you, Andrew. Sorry.
How will we know it's incomplete?
Because we're using our mind to try and understand itself, and we can never step outside our mind.
But we can use a mirror.
Yeah.
Why do we step outside our mind?
We can never really know if there are limits to knowledge, because we'd have to step outside ourselves in a way. We'd have to.
Right. But we
I don't know about that.
We have that there's limits to knowledge.
The thing is, like, what I don't understand is that if something is limiting us, we know it's limiting us, and therefore then we can inquire about it. But if something isn't limiting us, it has no effect on us, and therefore we can't know about it, it doesn't matter.
Right, like that's kind of related to
that's
what
very relativistic there, but yes.
That's kind of what I was talking about with omniscience earlier. Like, even if you could know everything, the one thing you couldn't know was that you did know everything, because there will necessarily be unknown things. Because as soon as you know about unknown things, they're not unknown. So there's always going to be
Why though?
a limit.
Can I go back to?
Why
I
would
want to
you
go
do
back
that?
to something before I forget. Which is just okay. To me, okay. I know what the hard problem is, but now I'm confused again about what is it really. So let's like restate. You said the hard problem won't be solved because see, my whole just as my preface, the thing is, I am the universe in my location. So how I'm feeling is actually something happening in the universe in my location. So what did I have to establish again? What was the hard problem that I was supposed to establish? That other people, that phenomena can happen elsewhere? Just seems like, well, how
It's
many
just
examples do you say to say there exists a phenomena, blah, blah, blah? I am an example. Maybe everybody else in the universe is dead. Doesn't matter. Just the fact that I exist itself implies that this phenomena is possible to exist. So, boom, there it is, proved. So what was it? Let's restate it because I've lost track of why that's hard, that problem. What are we asking? What's the answer it's supposed to be?
it's just trying to reconcile first person subjective, conscious experience
Hmm.
with purely third person sort of objective views of, brains and whatnot. Like, what is it about
Yeah.
what? I mean, I guess it's sort of the reason it's hard is because what we actually call matter is not really matter in itself. It's actually just another conscious experience. Like, we never step outside our consciousness.
Right. So the reason
We're-
it's hard, let me put it as this why it's hard, is because it feels like to solve it, you'd have to be able to get in somebody else's mind and feel what they feel, and we can never do that.
by
Right.
definition.
Yeah. So, but with the way I'm looking at it now, it's more like, okay, I feel this phenomenon, I call it consciousness, the theater, the Cartesian theater, and I look at myself and I see the process that's going on in my neurology and stuff like that, and it's generating it. I'm a materialist. Granted, I'm making a materialist assumption that what you see is what you get, and what you don't see is still there, and it's what you get, And so this is what I get. If I see that same pattern out there in the same thing I'm in, I mean, I'm connected to it. That's a self expanding. Wherever I go is a place that is interacting with me, and I see that same pattern. Isn't that, why shouldn't there be a consciousness over there? If we're saying, look, how about this? There's nothing that special about consciousness. When I see a river, then it's just another river. Why would it be like, oh, I see everything I see here, but I don't know if it's the same on the inside? You know what I mean? It starts to be pointless.
Yeah, I mean, what when we look out at the world, right? When we have a visual experience, we think that our eyes are taking like a photograph snapshot of everything outside, and that somehow we are somehow inside our head looking out through the eyes and everything else. When
Right.
in fact, your entire visual field is actually a neurological experience happening way at the back of your head somewhere. And you're not
Yeah.
going to find any picture in there, and
Yeah.
it looks completely different to your visual field. But that's only because what you call your brain is itself another conscious experience. So we can never know anything about consciousness because we're, by definition, not conscious of its absence, in exactly the same way that a fish presumably knows nothing of the water because it never steps out, and we presumably know nothing of consciousness.
Well, I guess it's just that, I mean,
Can I
the thing
jump in here?
yeah, go ahead.
I've heard this argument, like this is definitely a Kantian perspective, and I'm glad we have Immanuel Kant here to espouse it. This idea that because we look at the world through human faculties, we have a human brain, we have human eyes, the way we see the world and the way we sense the world is different than a bat. Let's say the bat has different faculties. The bat sees the world from a bat perspective. That necessarily limits us, and therefore we cannot know reality as it really is. It's always being distorted. That's an argument from Kant. The thing is, though, if we know that to be true, if we know we are biased, then we can transcend that bias through various means, through maybe scientific equipment, through, I don't know, maybe eventually bionic eyes, and I guess they're soon coming out, bionic sensory tools. If we didn't know we were biased, then you'd have a point, and then Kant would be right, because then we would be a victim of our senses, a victim of our faculties. But if we know where we're biasing things, we know where we're humanly acquiring information.
Okay. How do we even know we're biased?
Yeah.
How do we?
No
we
one's
imagine,
claiming...
but wait, we imagine we're biased because the data in the real world, but we never really compare to the data in the real world. What we do is we get more experiences, and of all the data we keep getting from the real world, we compare that data to itself, and we see statistical parts that are unpredictable and little core parts that are predictable, right? So that's even how we know we're biased. So I think you can step back from that and look, if I interpret myself as just a stream of information, that's all I really know. That's what Descartes should have said.
That's what I'm
perceiving. Right. So if that's all I know, and I look at the information, and some of it is, you know, it seems to be about space and time and location, my location and everything, then suddenly I know that there can be such a thing as this stream of information, this stream of consciousness.
That's the best approach. That's what me and Kant do. We start from a purely, we don't assume anything, and we work towards things like, oh, I have a body, oh, you know, my experiences happen to be correlated with brain states, and oh, there seems to be other people that look like me and everything. But that's already after the, like, all that ultimately has to terminate with, as he said, information, right? Without making any assumptions about the ontology, whether it's a brain in a vat or whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that there is simply this raw experience, and we're not gonna make any assumptions about it.
Well,
so that
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I guess the other
I didn't
point,
mean to interrupt. I just hard to hold in. I wasn't interrupting because you were done talking. Sorry.
The other point, though, that I think follows my line of reasoning is that without a consciousness or a faculty to be aware of something, you cannot gain knowledge from it. Like Kant has this idea of things in themselves. Like if we don't look at the world through a consciousness somehow, which is, I guess, which presumably is impossible, then we get the raw world, we get the things in themselves. But there is no possible, it seems, there's no possible way to gain knowledge without a means to do so.
Yeah, but see, the thing that Kant said, right? Kant said that the noumenal world could be completely different from the phenomenal world, or it could be exactly the same, but we have no way of knowing, because as soon as we experience it, it's automatically part of the phenomenal world.
Right.
So,
but see, I think
so
in a way he's taking a classic assumption that it's separate in the first place. See, what I'm saying is, like,
it might not be.
If I have a stream of, well, forget it. It doesn't even exist. All that exists is this my stream of information. Okay, I have a stream of information. Basically, it's an experience that I name as a stream of information, because trying to talk about the fact that information is that you know, this constantly changing image. The idea of an image is more arbitrary than the idea of this constantly changing. So I'm just calling that information. That means information exists, right? That means information exists, however it exists.
It's coming from somewhere, though.
It appears to be coming from somewhere, and this is my point. If information exists, then the only next step is, does information exist outside the stream? Well, yeah, it seems to be coming from somewhere. And because of our experiences of feeling like we're pointing data collection devices, you know, we can affect what's coming in there. So, yeah, exactly. And if information is real, and we know that just from the definition of our own stream of consciousness, suddenly, like I said, I get to say, yeah, there's an external world, but is it made of gears? Are we in a matrix? Is it Vishnu's dream? You know, the three options. It doesn't matter. It's full of information. Suddenly, the transactionalism between me, the real world, and thus some other information processing device conscious or computing, whichever, but let's say a conscious one that I assume or say is conscious, it's much more legitimate. There's no disconnection there. It's information inside us. It's information before it gets inside this stream, and there can be other streams that get that information, and you really haven't assumed, you know, that much, because you're just saying I am a phenomenon of a certain sort, and it looks like more than one of my kind of phenomena is happening, right?
I always thought that the noumenal world from Kant was a kind of a, I think Rand would call it an anti-concept, or it just doesn't make sense because you can't know anything about the phenomenal world. Somehow Kant did, but you can't, by definition, you can't know anything about the phenomenal world, because to know is to be aware of, is to use a consciousness and use faculties or use instruments of some kind.
Right, but no, but
So
what I was,
what is a noumenal world?
Well, but I want to inject right here, because this is where
impossibility.
I'm saying we need to shift the conversation, because if it's information, then and it's coming from somewhere, then we regain the fact that it really is about where it came from. There's illusion in it.
This is all wrong. This is just totally, I think the phenomenal world necessarily exists, regardless of whether or not it's the same as the noumenal, right? I mean, I think that how things, like I said before, how things seem is inseparable from how they are. So the phenomenal world is in itself a kind of noumena, right? It's reality doing this seeming thing, but this seeming thing is information, and that is what it is. It is a way for reality to be. It's necessarily the thing in itself. We already are the thing in itself. We already have it.
I don't understand what that means. We are the universe.
We aren't.
Well, I mean,
that doesn't make sense to me.
We aren't separate.
Well, okay, let me put it this way. If we are materialists, if we've made that assumption, then we are the logical proof that you can have consciousness. Even though we haven't done the proof ourselves, Mother Nature did, or whatever. It happened, accidental, whatever. Here it is. So it's the kind of thing, sometimes if you say there exists a phenomena such as blah, 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 like I said, it doesn't matter if you're the only living thing in your universe at a given moment. You basically establish that this informational material, whatever it really is, can make this kind of phenomena, whatever it really is. Suddenly you have bridged from the 3D. How would I know if I have a conscious being? Well, I don't know. When we saw little tiny microbes in pond water, we realized they were little animals that were going off and eating one thing and running from another thing because they had intentional behavior. I think we can tell from information if something is processing information, including the fact that everything is processing information. So it becomes a question of, well, how is it processing it? So there's sort of a unification if you just look at everything as information processing. And this is why I think some of our logic goes wrong, because we look at things statically, like Kant there was saying about you think you have an image. Really, you got these two images and it's constantly changing, and you all image process it back to something that looks a little steady. That's just your conception of reality. And if we go back to basics, which is what logic's all about, it's got to be transactional information processing. It can't be equal signs and plus. It has to be transactional information processing, in my view. The real mathematics, that's what the real mathematics would be if we had a super genius that invented the next kind of, after calculus, after Hilbert space. What's the next mathematics? It would have to be something way more transactional. And maybe we already have that actually in quantum mechanics, because of the term, the time term has a pretty
transactional in the sense that that time is already playing a role in the whole process as you're doing it.
Yeah, transactional in that time is a part of it, and also that every exchange of information causes a transformation, right? So that's
Right.
why if I get information about the real world, it can never be what's going on in the real world. It has to be the map to the territory, and that territory is a map to some other territory or
Right.
whatever.
The very act of recepting it changes it in some way.
Right. So it's transactional but it's not, but it's related to what it was before. So you can learn a lot and measure back, and you can walk back and find out that the bloody knife is there because that was the murderer left it. You know, you can work your way through in certain chains backwards. And get information, even though all you saw was the color red and a knife, and it tells you this other information because you can step back through the transactions. And yet at every step, you know, something has changed. There's room for illusion.
Sounds like Plato's cave.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just like Plato because he gave this physical reality, the world of ideas. But see, it is a cool space, this world of ideas. We are living in this mathematical thing that our brain posited this context where, you know, I can sprout wings and fly. And if I have a really good imagination, I could create all kinds of scenes and concepts, and I could get things done by visualizing things that I want to do. Oh, yeah, I could do it this way, and boom. So, you know, and that's what he's really talking about. It's just not stupid to say that's better than the real world.
Do you think that we're all chained in a basement somewhere and looking at shadows?
Oh, no. No, I think what we see is what we get. This is it. The world's made of information. The world is made of information. This is it.
That's exactly what I was saying before. Yeah. Like how things, you know, I've said it a million times, but how things seem is in a way how they are. Yeah. Illusions exist.
Yeah, but you're cutting a cross section, right? Because we could have a new kind of eyeball or sonar sound, or you know, the sonar of a bat. You know, so what you see is what you get. Is also there's a hint in there of you're limited. It doesn't mean you're seeing everything, no. But what you're seeing is really that's it. And it's all information. And when we want to decide if we're in a computer or not, well, in all seriousness, if we're in a matrix, from within it, with the kind of freedom we do have, we could keep looking at physics down to the point of, holy shit, we must be in a computer. You know, I mean, we would be able to figure it out. Eventually, we'd notice the subtle differences between a simulated reality and the real reality, I believe. You know, you might say no because we'd be limited by it, but no, not if we're in a matrix because we'd have real brains that were plugged into it. Now, it's a different thing if we're in Vishnu's dream. How would you ever figure that out? You wouldn't. You would just figure out, wow, reality is really weird. You know, you would have no thing to compare it with.
Sooner or later, you've got to hit a ground where reality just is what it is. And I'm saying that we already are that.
Yes, I agree.
But, yeah. And
I think that's just theoretical, though. I think that's just theoretical because we can never know what it is.
No, but we're saying we're by definition what it is. We're not, but keeping in mind that we're way limited information, so we're not knowing everything about it. But what we experience, that really is. It has to be by definition of the fact that we have a stream of consciousness. What does it mean to exist? It means to have this stream of consciousness as far as we know. So
we give meaning to the word exist versus not exist. I think necessarily we are inseparable from that which is. I don't think that.
But wait, it's like that God question. What does it mean to exist? And I'm saying most people don't ever give me nobody's invented the proper definition, and I'm saying I have one. What it means to exist is to be in the stream that I have of information.
The fact that
that's what it means to exist.
All dictionary definition becomes circular at some point, but the meaning of your words is shown through their use. Right, like you can still know the meaning of words without, like, if some skeptic puts you on the spot and asks you to define things ad nauseum, it's not really fair if they're trying to win an argument, because you can still know what words like exist mean even if you can't, you know. It's like asking a blind. It's like talking to a blind person about color. It's not. It's something that you just have to experience. It's like when St. Augustine was asked, "What is time?" He said, "Of course I know what time is until you ask me to explain it."
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I have an addition to that. That's a good example. I think it's one of those philosophical things. And there's this great paper on, how does a bat see? It was a pretty good work on that kind of thing. But an interesting thing is blind people know that there's a sense they don't understand.
Yeah,
So
because
they can't know what it's like exactly.
yeah,
Though there's also some visual cortex work inside. So, but ignoring that for a second, but they can know they're missing one, or just like we know we're missing a bat sense and stuff. So it's kind of interesting because we don't know what it is like, but we kind of know that it's missing, and you can't even triangulate on. You can imagine how a bat probably senses sonar just based on, look, we have touch and sound and smell, and they all interact with space and are visualized in the brain a certain way. So you can imagine that, okay, well, it's probably it's in a visual space, right? Spatially, they know location, so it's probably they see that stuff.
My favorite example is a color you've never seen before, right? I can conceptually understand that, even though there's no. But
what's it look like? You don't know. Yeah. Exactly.
Can they dream? Can a blind person dream?
Visual dreams, you mean?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much you dream.
Well, here's the thing I think about that. I think in the end it's a good philosophical example, but it's kind of bad because blind people do have visual processing information in the brain. Having never been correlated, if you've been blind forever, to your eyes, it looks inactive and stuff, but there's still neurons firing, and I would think it might be hard for them to put words on it, but there's probably a feeling they have that is related to the dormant visual sense. You know what I mean? So they might have a flash of color or in a situation of not being able to. They never got to point at a red ball and go ball. Well, so they don't have any conception. They can't talk about it, but it might be in there anyway. You know what I mean? The color in the back of the brain.
Hume put forward this argument that there's no idea without an antecedent impression, and this is also linked with the argument, the missing shade of blue. That if you've seen two shades of blue, would it be possible to infer a middle shade of blue even if you've never had that impression? Just from the pure internal operations of the mind alone, would you be able to work out that idea even though you've never had an impression of it? But technically you have had an impression of it because it's still a result of your mental operations.
Plus also you don't see an image, you see this stream, and the fact is when you move your eyes you're seeing all the gradients. You've seen so many billions of every color because it's a continuous thing, you know what I mean? When your eye is actually coursing across there, you don't just see the blue of the ball, you see all of these shades, including your eyelash changing, so you will have seen that shade of blue. But I think if you hadn't, and actually different colors name different parts of the spectrum, and this is one of the Lakoff things, and can't see colors the same. They can, there's cultures that have 3 colors that are named in the reds, and they can see red better than Western people with no names for those colors.
Yeah.
Like in tests to say, are these 2 things the same color or not?
But what's higher there is the level of sensory discrimination. I'm talking about a completely new color that
I'm talking. Oh, right, yeah. I see.
At right angles to all possible conception whatsoever.
Well, no, you were talking about a couple things. The new color is gone, but what about the middle color? Well, I was saying that in our real image processing, you would have seen that middle color, right? Because as your eye is scanning around and the light conditions are changing, you know what I mean? If you've seen one blue and another, even just looking at those 2 objects on the screen, you'll see the middle shades as your eye moves around and as shadows happen. You see what I'm saying? So you will have technically seen those shades, so it's a hard thing to test. But with this cognitive stuff on the with different cultures that name different colors, the different cultures, they all have equal eyesight. They can tell better colors in the region that they've named, that they've seen a lot, that they're familiar with, proving that middle color phenomena is true because people are more familiar with colors that have been named. They notice them more, so they've seen them more. So their knowledge of another color that technically they've seen is still less and gradiently, can be measured different. But the weird thing too, of course, of this example is that we have had new colors, right? There was, I think it was blue turned into blue and red, and they're not all equally old, the 3 colors. So we've had that. We could be right now about ready to see ultraviolet. So it's an interesting idea because some human at some point then could have this experience of noticing a new color, like a bird's that finally flew or something. Kind of would be cool.
And also, I think that you know that obviously color is a neurological experience, or at least the quality of color.
Absolutely.
But there's a physical counterpart to that, which is the wavelength of the light. But the higher that your nervous system can discriminate, like the greater discriminatory power of your senses, the more, not only are there more shades that you're aware of, but it does open the doors to potentially infinite numbers of colors, depending on how well you can.
How you look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other funny thing is, here's the thing. I'm really into this visual processing, and I've seen some cool stuff. And working in astronomy, there was a guy who makes the images like for the telescope, and he went into a lot of color theory and how the eye interprets color and what the color means. And we've seen this this red, blue, gold dress thing as an example of the kind of color illusions. But anyway, so it's actually funny because it's mostly true that a color that you see is from the wavelength of light, but not really. There's all these textures. For example, the eye, when there's spreckly light, it makes a different color and a different qualia, let's say, because color is too simple. So anyway, it's just kind of funny because colors, I'm just saying, they aren't one-to-one with the wavelengths. They are doing so much processing in that little area of the eye. And another thing I wanted to say about the eye is, do you know this part? And I'd heard of this, and I knew, first of all, there's a blind spot, right? There's a blind spot where your optic nerve hooks. This optical illusion, you can draw a line on a piece of paper and move it to where it's in that blind spot, and it disappears.
The rabbit in the hat. Yeah, I've done that experiment.
I haven't seen it done that way, but if you just draw a plus on a piece of paper and put a dot on there, you can move that into your blind spot by moving it, to get the right angle, and it'll disappear and the line is solid.
Also, on a monitor, the old CRT computer monitors, I don't know if they do it in LCD, they only output red, green, and blue pixels, but they can generate yellow by having the right mixture of red and green. But there's no yellow pixel, although your nervous system interprets that mixture as yellow, even though the wavelength of light.
So, and so this is the other thing. This is kind of mind-blowing. We could all take it. I'm excited to mention it to you because this is a part of the information stream to realize, okay, so color. You think I'm seeing color all around here, right? No, in my eye, there's a dot the size of the moon, well, maybe 1.5 times the size of the moon. That's the only color. Everything outside of that on your retina is black and white. No color. So all the color that you're seeing, like that you think there's something colorful in your peripheral vision, if it's not within this thing, that's like a 50-cent piece across, you're not seeing that color right then. That's your memory remembering that color the last time you looked over at that thing. So, I mean, it opens up just how you can experience your own illusion here. You can know from a fact of looking at eyeballs and believing that that is what's causing vision, that I am recreating stuff that I've seen. I'm doing a good job. I'm recreating it accurately enough that I get to just pretend it's real, that it is what I'm seeing. But I know for a fact that, this whole screen looks color. And I know I only have this little, rather large postage stamp about the size of one of your icons down there that I can look at color, actually look at the moment. I'm looking at Andrew's face and I see the red and everything, and then without moving my eyes, I see myself up here and it still looks like it's blues and all of these shades and some orange on the back. I know for a fact that that's just like when I look at a cloud and see a face. I know there's not really a face up there. So this is the way that the consciousness can triangulate on itself. As you figure out the illusion in what you're getting, it actually expands what you know. To accept that it's an illusion expands what you can know about it. And so that's the process that I'm saying. I don't see why that process would ever end. And so that's the process why I'm saying there's infinite amount of information in the universe, at least for a human. It might be that a different kind of a brain or a different kind of phenomena or the universe as a whole has a finite amount of information. I think because infinity is a process, then even my infinite amount of looking is going to be finite because the universe is going to end. I'm going to die, and all kinds of endings are going to ensure that it's finite. So,
I think I think the significant, like I hear all the stuff about our perceptions are limited, or we see stuff that aren't really there, and all that, as a way of attacking the validity of the senses usually.
Yeah,
and
but not in my case.
I think the significant epistemological problem, though, is that yes, we can see illusions, but that doesn't matter so much because we know they're illusions. If there was something that we see or sensed that we did not know was an illusion and it's not real, then you have a problem. That's a bad thing then.
That's a false reality or a delusion.
But then it's not as bad.
When you have an illusion you don't know is an illusion, we call that a delusion.
I see an epistemological problem trying to use the senses to doubt the senses, like to use empirical findings to question our senses as though, like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to use your senses. You have to begin to use your senses without assuming whether they're fallible or not. You just take them for what they are.
No, but you can. Over time you can. Because, like, for example, with this experiment of the plus and a dot on a line, I can look at that with my senses, and I move it all around, and I expect it to have a certain kind of transposable, consistency, right? Like, it looks like it's changing, but every change that happens is, there's a mapping, like Cantor would look. There's a mapping. It's a distortion of what was there before, and when I move it into this position where the dot disappears, that's not a distortion we expect or can explain except by doubting our senses. And then we look at the senses and see, oh, that's where the optic nerve comes, and the logic is really quite logical, that we've doubted our senses entirely using our senses.
Yeah.
So a demonstration of that.
And also, when the straw is bent when you put it in water.
Yeah, that's a classic. Pirro loved that example, the original Pirro, I mean.
That's actually what most sense data theorists, they use the argument from illusion to, it's always this representation, right? It wasn't really until Kant that he really formalized or wrote it down that our perceptions aren't, like, when we perceive, we're not merely passive receptors of the world. We actively filter and shape our perception of the world based on our sensory apparatus. So it's not merely that our senses are receiving reality, rather it's more like they're a filter and reality passes through that filter. But maybe we could reverse engineer our own senses from inside our senses and break reality down. I think that would be a pretty impressive feat of human knowledge if we could do that.
I always thought, though, that Kant was saying that it is inevitable that we will bias and we can't get around it. I thought that was I thought he was taking the hard line on that and saying that no, we will always be stuck with having a biased perception of reality. But like I'm saying, if we know it's biased, like you just said, if we know we're filtering things, that means that we can do something about it. Where it really becomes a problem in epistemology is if we were doing something that we didn't know and therefore we couldn't get around it, and it made the difference to us. Now you have a problem.
Well, no, but Kant isn't saying we couldn't do that. He's just, I think he's on the side of it'll take for infinity. You'll never get rid of the bias, but you get more control of your bias, and the bias can be narrowed, and you ignore things because you know you don't need to look at every thumbprint.
That's still within the context of presupposing that your senses are valid. Like you can still
I swear to God, it doesn't matter if they're valid. There's not even a question of if they're valid. It's the only thing. The only thing is the stream of information, and even calling it senses is really just identifying that there's different classifications. It's easy to distinguish between sound and vision, even though they also cognitively come together, and they try to share location, spatial senses, where smells for humans not so much. We can see all of these different things, even though it comes as a big gestalt. We just categorizing. So even calling it senses is just a category for an information space that seems separate from another one, color from sound. And it doesn't have to be valid. It is what it is. It is what it is. And when we're talking about validity, what we're really looking for from the data processing perspective, I would argue, I think, is that internal consistency. We find when we do that, some images don't play well with the others. When we look at this piece of paper and we know that dot's there, and by then and we can make it go away, we're like, well, it's really there. I can know which is really there and which is the illusion. I could tell the difference because of the consistency, because one is following a consistency. If I had that piece of paper and there was no dot and then I put it there and a dot appeared, I would just make the opposite conclusion. I'd say, well, the consistency said is that it's not there, and for some reason it appears. That's the anomaly. And you can do that just by looking at statistical internal relationships between the stuff you've got.
But what Kant was saying was that no amount of using the senses will ever be able to absolutely guarantee the validity of the senses. Kant was saying that there's necessarily a bias.
And I'm saying there is no question about the validity of the senses. It doesn't even make sense as a question. Validity compared to what?
Well, if there's an external world, like Kant said that there will necessarily be a limitation towards knowing the thing in itself.
Right, but if there's a limitation, then you're saying there's information out there that you don't have. So that means
there might be
information out there.
Kant said there might be, but by definition we couldn't know. That's his point.
But you can't.
Why do we care?
That's
we don't
unfair.
need to know. We don't need to know.
I didn't see.
All we need to know is, but I'm saying there's a logical system that'll follow just from what I do have from my stream of information. And questions like, do we really exist? That makes no sense. Do we really exist? Yeah. The only question is, what do we exist as? What's it like? Right, because we have the stream of what existence means is that this stream exists. If it happens in the stream, it exists. If something interacts with me, that's really just saying it appeared in my stream, and so it exists. Is it valid? Well, you can do statistical tests to see how consistent it is with itself. You can get information from other sources, which really always just comes to you through this stream. Someone's words or data they show you, or you run your own. It's always coming through this stream, so it's always a very limited problem of internal consistency within this stream. Now, is it valid? Does it matter if it's valid if it gets so internally consistent that whenever you get new data you can predict what it's going to be because it's so internally consistent, you're pattern matching, that when you get a new evidence of an apple, it's always an apple. Oh, that one was a photo. That was a rubber apple. Oh, so it's 99.9% consistent. What's the question of validity anymore?
Yeah,
it's not valid. It's not valid, but it's 99% consistent. Well,
no, the question of validity still exists, but it doesn't actually matter, like in terms of rational.
That's what skepticism is.
But it doesn't actually, like it doesn't actually. What?
Well, I'm saying this is where we do differ, and I respect your position. But I think one of the ways of saying what it means to be a skeptic, is on this topic, which is that we say the question of validity doesn't matter. It's all about the consistency, and that is how we deal with the uncertainty of nature. Is that we expect that. Right, we expect that because we're not looking for the validity, we're looking for the consistency. Is your idea consistent with your stuff? Is the math or the pattern or the logic you use about how cosmology works, is it consistent with the information you get looking into cosmology and looking at the stars and the things that it relates to? If it's internally consistent, it'll never be valid. Valid is this abstract notion of proving it's complete and doesn't contradict itself, is never wrong in some sense, right? a family of ideas of and I do this with computer. I prove things are valid because in computer logic, yeah, you can. It's math. You can make it valid. But back in the real world, you don't need this question of validity. It's an artificial question it's a way to do math problems. It's a way of doing long division. It's a technique. And in the real world, what you have is consistency, and that's what science and engineering is using. Well, I don't know why this works, but 90% of the time the buildings stay up. So.
Well, that's induction, and it's, you know, a bunch of other things. But all I was basically getting at was that even if you're inside the matrix, right, you can still, you know, you can still go to an optician inside the matrix to check if your senses were valid, right? But it's still, Kant was saying that you're necessarily stuck in that, even if there isn't a matrix, even if things are exactly as they seem, you by definition couldn't know that.
Right,
and that's what
but he's asking the question, are you really in a doctor's office? And I'm saying it doesn't matter because...
It doesn't matter either.
No, because I'm saying your stream of consciousness is images. You call those images a doctor's office. And then you
right.
Yeah. So there is no reason to get outside of that and somehow validate that that's really where you are. And the whole illusion thing is like the sun appears to come up, and that's real information. Does it mean the sun is coming up? It depends on how you look at it. Everything depends on how you look at it.
Yeah,
you know,
and even in that example, the matrix, you know, the matrix still exists. What the source of your perception doesn't, you know, I don't care like what's causing it.
Here's the thing. I share that. Sorry, but I share this idea and this want that Kant had, and it's like that there should be a way to validate. Am I really having this experience? It seems like I'm having, because sometimes I'm wondering, am I having a fun time or not? You know, and I would like to know, is this really happening? We ask that naturally, but because of his arguments and the arguments of others, I know we're never going to know that. So I have figured out a system which makes me not give a shit anymore. Now, we as animals have some sort of a desire, but I think the desire to see things that way is one of the illusions that I'm dealing with. So it's like, okay, it feels like I want to know things are real, but instead of saying, am I really having this experience, I just say, you know, how am I feeling about what I'm experiencing, you know? And so, I mean, and I guess what I'm saying is I admit some of my construction is in order to avoid this inevitability of I'm not going to spend the rest of the universe's time hoping to have some sense of validity about what I'm seeing in that sense. And I'm going to be happy with statistical analysis and information processing to get, you know, answers that are 60% sure and full of illusion. So,
right.
But with that, hey, you guys can say a closing statement, but I wanted to tell you and help myself not just come back because it's very, very interesting. It's hard for me to shut up.
That's all we have is probabilistic inference, induction.
Closing statements because we're going to go. I got to go do some work. So go ahead. Yeah, that is all we have, and go ahead and add to it if any kind of closing thing on this part of epistemology if you want to.
No, I think we've covered everything. I unless you want to add something, I don't have anything to add. Things seem
thanks for the conversation.
I would just say how things seem is inseparable from how they are, which is that's been the essence of what we've been discussing.
Well, that's the bridge of where you and I are agreeing, even though we're still coming from different expectations or how we're going to phrase it. Is that at this what I call the transactional thing? It's like it's inseparable, but it doesn't mean that what you see is what it was out there. No, it's just that it's connected and it's inextricably, there's a connection there, but there's also transformation. So we agree.
Though, the whole purpose though is to understand what's out there for reliability and practical purposes, so we can walk around and not get hit by trucks and stuff, right?
Yeah, but you don't have to put it that way. That's just semantics. It's about getting to know what's in this stream of consciousness, and when we get to know that, because some of the things we're perceiving is us moving our body and stuff, we cannot get hit by, we don't need to look out there to not get hit by a bus. We're able to just information process what we get. Our eyes are connected to out there, granted, and that's a real connection. So it's real information, and that's the fact that even if we have illusions about what we see, it really is connecting us to this outside world. And I'm just saying, as philosophers, and we're trying to make a formal system, let's stop talking about the outside world. What we should talk about is, I have a data set. Here's the processing I've done on the data set. Here's what I can say about that data set. And then when I get new data, I should be able to use that, processing to say things about data I haven't gotten yet. And if I succeed at that, then it's like, okay, that's pretty consistent. If you're consistent with information you haven't even gotten yet, that's kind of the ultimate in consistency proof.
I think my point, this whole discussion has been that if we know it's an illusion, we can do something about it.
Well, I'm glad you say that too, because I also feel like that's a bridge where that's kind of my whole illusions exist thing, is not to say, I don't bring this stuff up or the limit of visual to say, so it's all crap. No, I'm saying this is the good part. In that tiny circle I'm talking about, we have vision that is amazingly advanced for mammals. Especially. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of data we can get. The more we know about how your data recorder works, the more information you can get from it. Right? So yeah, I think so that was cool, because we definitely are three different schools of approach to these questions, but we're all sort of acknowledging kind of where we are right now and what we do know, and that some of the issues hinge on, we agree on what this all hinges on. So I think that's a cool summary. And so thanks, you guys, and yeah, come on back next week. I'll be around.
Thanks, Piero.
All right, cheers.
Thanks.